Welcome in, everybody. This is Past the Salt. I am Bryce Vega. And for today, I want to go over line by line the complaint filed by former Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores against the National Football League, New York Football Giants, Miami Dolphins, Denver Broncos, and John Doe's 1 through 29, which presumably mean that Brian Flores is potentially leaving the door open to adding additional NFL teams to the lawsuit, depending on how this case proceeds. And a lot is going to be made about this lawsuit. It's it's pretty extraordinary how, at least from my perception, it looks like this story might overshadow Tom Brady's retirement at the end of the day. A scandal or a potential scandal like this one is going to certainly draw some heads, um, and it's going to, and it might even implicate Tom Brady himself based on some reporting that I saw online. Um, there's several allegations in this complaint that I found pretty extraordinary if they're in fact true. Um, Legally speaking, I don't know if the case really will hold up. At the end of the day, this is a complaint. This is the very first document ever filed in any kind of lawsuit. And at this pleading stage of any case, a plaintiff is not expected to prove every single element of his or her case. That's what discovery is for. That's why there's a process in every case for there to be exchange of information through written discovery requests or depositions to find out more about the underlying facts relevant to a lawsuit. So even though I think that certainly by looking at this 58-page complaint, I don't think that there might be enough information or facts to prove what Brian Flores is alleging, which is that the NFL and NFL clubs um, employ um, tactics or exclusionary tactics to not allow people of African descent to not become head coaches. Um, while he might not have all the information at this juncture to be able to prove those elements, doesn't mean that he can't at a later point through discovery. However, at the very least, this document, this complaint that we're going to go over, should have ideally enough to be able to survive a motion to dismiss. However, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get to it. So, this case was filed in the Federal District Court for the Southern District of New York. Southern District of New York is one of the most busy federal districts in the entire country. In fact, I think it's the busiest. It's where most of the big class action lawsuits throughout the country are filed. And it's Brian Flores as a class representative on behalf of himself and all others similarly situated, which means that he is trying to make this into a class action lawsuit. And we're going to see several paragraphs in this complaint in which he is potentially signaling to other African American coaches, former head coaches, current coordinators that hey, if you want to join in as a member of the class that this lawsuit is seeking to represent, have at it. Um, as a side note, there's no bright line rule for this kind of stuff, but usually in federal court, you'd want at least your class to be have 50 members on it in order to get class certification. For the most part, courts don't like class actions all that much because they would rather have each individual person bring their own claims because the risk of a class action, the risk that a class action may have if it's brought as a class is that not everybody will be heard, or not everybody will be able to have their specific circumstances properly adjudicated. So whenever possible, courts like to have each individual plaintiff bring their individual claims as opposed to just bundling them up in a single not nice and tight lawsuit. Um, well, and like I said, there's no bright line requirement that there needs to be 50 class members. It's just usually what a lot of lawyers will try to meet. And uh, I'm an NFL fan. I love football. I watch a lot of football games during football season. I don't know if we can get to 50, not only 50 black coaches who feel that they've been wronged, just 50 black coaches in general. That's only 32 teams, right? And sure, there's there's position coaches and coordinators, but even then, I don't know. I at least at the top of my mind, I can't think of a number that would get anywhere near 50. Anyway, the named defendants are the National Football League, New York Football Giants, Miami Dolphins, Denver Broncos, and John Doe's 1 through 29, like I mentioned. Brian Flores might be leaving the door open to potentially suing other NFL teams. And oddly enough, I've never seen this before. The first page of the complaint starts with a transcription of text messages between Brian Flores and Bill Belichick. Sorry, I fucked this up. I double checked and misread the text. I think they are naming Brian Dable. I'm sorry about that. BB. Bill Belichick informing plaintiff Brian Flores 3 days before his interview with the New York Giants that Brian Dable had already been selected for the job. Morals cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. The law cannot make an employer love me, but it can keep him from refusing to hire me because of the color of my skin. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Powerful stuff there, however. There's a big leap in logic here, and let's see if we can see that. He says, Bill Belichick says, sorry, I fucked this up. I double checked and misread the text. I think they are naming Brian Dable. I'm sorry about that, Bill Belichick. BB. And the complaint assumes, or the drafter of the complaint assumes that what this means is that Brian, that Bill Belichick told Brian Flores that Brian Dable was in fact hired. When what the text says is, I think they are naming Brian Dable. Not, I know they are Brian. I know that they are hiring Brian Dable, or here's proof that they hired Brian Dable. Nevertheless, while it's a leap in logic, it is certainly at the very least a reasonable inference for plaintiff to make. Preliminary statement. As this class action complaint is filed on the first day of Black History Month, we honor the brave leaders that fought so hard to help break down racial barriers of injustice. Martin Luther King Jr., Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, Jackie Robinson, and Mamie Till, to name only a few. All right? Unfortunately, however, there is so much more to be done. While racial barriers have been eroded in many years, defendant the National Football League, NFL, or the league, lives in a time of the past. As described throughout this class action complaint, the NFL remains rife with racism, particularly when it comes to hiring and retention of black head coaches, coordinators, and general managers. Over the years, the NFL and its 32 member organizations, teams, have been given every chance to do the right thing. Rules have been implemented, promises made, but nothing has changed. In fact, racial discrimination has only been made worse by the NFL's disingenuous commitment to social equity. As such, in the face of the risk associated with combating racism and injustice, and in particular standing up to organizations as powerful as the NFL and its teams, Mr. Flores has determined that the only way of to effectuate real change is through the courts, where the NFL's conduct can be judged by a judge of Mr. Flores' peers, a judgment that is long overdue. Paragraph 4. In certain critical ways, the NFL is racially segregated and is managed much like a plantation. Ooh, incendiary language right there. Its 32 owners, none of whom are black, profit substantially from the labor of NFL players, 70% of whom are black. The owners watch the games from atop NFL stadiums in their luxury boxes, while their majority black workforce put their bodies on the line every Sunday, taking vicious hits and suffering debilitating injuries to their bodies and their brains, while the NFL and its owners reap billions of dollars. Paragraph 5. Many players desire to coach for their post playing careers. Others desire to work their way into management level positions at one of the NFL's 32 teams. Unfortunately, for black individuals, that is easier said than done. Only one coach of the NFL's 32 teams, 3%, employs a black head coach. Only 4 of the NFL's 32 to a percent employ a black offensive coordinator. Only 11 of the NFL's 32 teams, 34%, employ a black defensive coordinator. Only 8 of the NFL's 32 teams, 25%, employ a black special teams coordinator. Only 3 of the NFL's 32 teams, 9%, employ a black quarterback coach. And only 6 of the NFL's 32 teams, 19%, employ a black general manager. So, just to make a quick stop right here, all of the things already alleged in this complaint are certainly incendiary and certainly um, will rile up people's passions for touchy subjects such as racial discrimination. And I am not in any way, shape, or form in a position to really make any sort of judgment as to whether or not the NFL is in fact a racist institution that keeps NFL potential NFL head coaches from obtaining those kinds of jobs. Uh, but I don't know if calling the NFL or saying that it's akin to a plantation is a smart way of truly. Uh, I'm having trouble finding the words for this one, but if you say that kind of stuff, if you really can't turn around and then in the future look for a job or ask for a job with the National Football League, because for the most part, that's this is very the first thing that I thought when I read this was this is a lot of the same language that Colin Kaepernick used when he went up against the NFL, and he also made comments about NFL owners being like slave owners. So, and Colin Kaepernick never really found another job as a quarterback in the NFL. So, while a lot of people think that Brian Flores had a bright future as a head coach or even as a defensive coordinator in the NFL, I don't know if putting this type of language in a public document while suing the NFL and at the moment 3 NFL clubs is really going to be good for his future head coaching prospects with the NFL. Uh, but so far, we've gone through the first 6 paragraphs of this 58-page complaint, and this is a strategy that lawyers can use when drafting a complaint, and is he obviously they're trying to paint a narrative to try to establish that Brian Flores was the victim of racial discrimination. So far, we haven't really gone over specific facts related to Brian Flores himself. But this is just setting the stage as to some of the things that we're going to read later down the line. Anyway, paragraph 6. These numbers come from a pool of players that is approximately 70% black. This is not by chance. Rather, the statistics above and those described throughout this complaint are the result of race discrimination. Okay? You can say that, but it doesn't explain how. Sure, it doesn't look good when you have 70% of your player base being black, and yet um, the end result of head coaching jobs being held by people who are not black does not necessarily mean that discrimination was there. There's certainly it's certainly you can point to it and say that it's certainly disproportional. But at the end of the day, something like discrimination gets into a mindset, um, and this has yet to show what mindset somebody in a hiring position or power to hire a head coach had when deciding whether or not to go with a uh, black candidate or a non-black candidate. Continuing on, paragraph 7. The NFL has effectively conceded this point. Troy Vincent, the NFL Executive Vice President of Football Operations, recently stated with regards to black head coaches, there is a double standard, and we've seen that. And you talk about the appetite for what's acceptable. Let's just go back to Coach Donkey was let go in Tampa after winning season. Coach Wilkes, just a few years prior, was let go after one. Coach Caldwell was fired after a winning season in Detroit. It is part of the larger challenges that we have. But when you just look over time, it's over-indexing for men of color. These men have been fired after a winning season. How do you explain that? There's a double standard. I don't think that is something that we would shy away from, but that is all part of some of the things that we need to fix in the system. We want to hold everyone to why does one, let's say, get the benefit of the doubt to be able to build or take bumps and bruises in the process of getting a franchise turned over when others are not afforded that latitude. We've seen that in history at the professional level. All right, and there's a footnote associated to this. See Mask Mark, double standard for black coaches when it comes to keeping jobs. It's cited to the article where the quote is from. Um, I'm not entirely sure whether or not this is like the most damning quote. It is certainly pointing to instances where a black head coach was most likely let go when they shouldn't have, especially Dungy and Caldwell. Actually, all of them. But Dungy and Caldwell were extraordinary coaches. Wilkes was as well, but not as good as Dungy, certainly. Um, Now, whether that's because of specifically racism, NFL teams are they're run strangely. I know that just to look at the Caldwell situation, um, Caldwell was let go in Detroit because Detroit is a poorly run organization. I'd be hard pressed to think that Caldwell was uh, Caldwell was fired because of his race. Caldwell was a great coach. He was just in a bad organization, shitty franchise that just doesn't know how to win. Anyway, moving on. Paragraph 8. Similarly, Jonathan Bean, the NFL Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, stated, any criticism we get for lack of representation at the GM and head coach positions we deserve. We see that we're not where we want to be. We have to do much better. We're focusing on roles at the league, and all these roles are key roles, but certainly at the top of the house, general manager and head coach, that's the responsibility of the NFL to make sure that we are representing our current fan base and we're representing those that are in the league today. And if you look at it right now, we're grossly underrepresented. And it has a footnote that cites to the article where that quote comes from. Paragraph 9. Perhaps most of all, in connection with its distribution of settlement monies to retirees who suffer from traumatic brain injury, the NFL insisted on applying so called race norms. Put simply, the NFL took the position that white people simply have better baseline cognitive function than black people. This is the very definition of racism, the assumption that someone is not as smart as another because of the color of his skin or her skin. It is perhaps it also perhaps explains why the NFL and its teams are so loath to hire black head coaches, coordinators, and general managers, just as for years the league discriminated against black quarterbacks. Now, something to certainly highlight in paragraph 9 is that the league did, in fact, um, discriminate against black quarterbacks. There was no reason, none whatsoever, for Warren Moon to have not played in the NFL for the early stages of his career. And there's certainly many quotes from prior uh, managers and people in charge in the NFL that said that somebody of African descent could not be a quarterback because they just lacked the ability to process information as white quarterbacks. And that is simply just a racist stance to take. Though I don't. It's odd what so far this complaint is painting, at least in my opinion, because the plaintiff in this instance, Brian Flores, is taking these quotes from NFL officials who are saying, "Hey, we recognize that there is a disparity between the number of black candidates in uh, uh, amongst our ranks and the amount of players that we have that are of African descent, and we're working towards improving that." So there is, all of this stuff that is being laid out here is showing that there might be a pattern of discriminatory um, hiring because of the results that the NFL has reached in the people in head coaching positions and other positions of authority within NFL clubs. So far, none of this applies to Brian. This is not talking to anything that applies to Brian Flores himself. And Brian Flores is the only plaintiff. Nobody else has, even though it's filed as a class action complaint, to my knowledge and to anybody else's knowledge, no one else has joined in. So far, this is painting a narrative, but just because there might be a pattern of racism and or discriminatory practices when hiring. If Brian Flores was never discriminated against when he went to interview somewhere, he has no case. You for him to have some kind of discriminatory case to bring to court, he needed to be the victim of said discrimination. So he's laying all this out so far, again, to sort of paint a narrative, and will eventually reach Brian Flores himself. Paragraph 10. These are literal admissions of liability and fault on the part of the NFL and its owners, and yet no meaningful remedial action has been taken to remedy the recognized discrimination. All right, let's split the difference. I don't know if these are admissions of liability, but like I said, admissions of liability to whom? To Brian Flores? Not yet. We're not there yet. They are certainly observations, and they are describing desires to improve, and it is I think that there is a good argument to be made that not enough has been implemented to ensure that discriminatory practices when hiring are completely erased from the NFL. Paragraph 11. Even when black candidates get hired for head coaching position, a rarity, they are discriminated against in connection with the terms and conditions of their employment and compensation, and terminated even as far less successful white head coaches are retained. Moreover, black head coaches are far less likely than white head coaches to receive second chances, even as white head coaches are routinely hired by teams even after they fail elsewhere. This is the complaint stage. This might have been a good chance to indicate to lay out some examples, but this is the complaint stage, and they don't need to do that at this point. Paragraph 12. It has been nearly 20 years since the NFL implemented the Rooney Rule, purported to try to combat the utter lack of black head coaches in the NFL. As first implemented, the Rooney Rule required NFL teams to interview at least one black person in connection with any head coach vacancy. The Rooney Rule has since been expanded to cover general manager and other front office positions, as well as assistant head coach and coordinator positions. Moreover, as it relates to head coach positions, teams are now required to interview two minority coaching candidates, at least one of whom must be interviewed in person. Brief aside, I don't know if the Rooney Rule is really effective, or if the way it's implemented, if it reaches the desired goal, because for the most part, uh, there were a couple of years there where the common names that everybody would bring in were Marvin Lewis and Jim Caldwell, and I don't know how those men feel about their situations, but even Jim Caldwell during this past hiring season has, gone to interview for several teams, and I'm sure that at this point, Jim, at his, I think he's 60 something. At this point, he might just shrug his shoulders and not think that he's not gonna get hired again because it's been quite a few years, and he's just saying, "Oh, whatever." I'll go fly around at the expense of an NFL team, stay at an expensive, nice suite, and just rack up a bunch of bills on the NFL team's credit card when ordering some room service. Um, Moving on. Paragraph 13. The Rooney Rule may have been well intentioned, although it is hard to attribute benevolence to the NFL, given the complete lack of action that it has taken post Rooney Rule to remedy discrimination that it admits exists. However, well intentioned or not, what is clear is that the Rooney Rule is not working. It is not working because the number of black head coaches, coordinators, and quarterback coaches are not even close to being reflective of the number of black athletes on the field. The Rooney Rule is also not working because management is not doing the interviewing in good faith, and it therefore creates a stigma that interviews of black candidates are only being done to comply with the Rooney Rule rather than in recognition of the talents that black candidates possess. Uh, I would say that there's a lot of truth to what's alleged in paragraph 13, because some of the hires that are made in NFL circles are made fast, and we don't always learn of as to like who was interviewed for each and every single position, but you learn of a vacancy, and 2 days later you hear we've hired this person or we've promoted Y person. It's like, well, did you comply with the Rooney Rule? Did you interview somebody already? Feels like all you did was uh, check the box, interview somebody, and moved along. But at the end of the day, I don't work for an NFL club, so I don't exactly know the inner workings. But as an outside observer, paragraph 13 certainly describes how it looks. Paragraph 14. In January 2022, Mr. Flores, who spent 3 years as a head coach of defendant Miami Dolphins Ltd., the Dolphins or Miami, found himself without a job. He was fired by the Dolphins after leading the team to its first back-to-back winning seasons since 2003. The purported basis for his termination was alleged poor collaboration. In reality, the writing had been on the wall since Mr. Flores' first season as head coach of the Dolphins, when he refused his owner's directive to tank for the first pick in the draft. Indeed, the 2019 season, Miami's owner, Stephen Ross, told Mr. Flores that he would pay him $100,000 for every loss, and the team's general manager, Chris Greer, told Mr. Flores that Steve was mad that Mr. Flores' success in winning games that year was compromising the team's draft position. Oh boy. Paragraph 14 is one of the paragraphs that is being heavily cited online on places like Twitter. And that's a we don't know for how many games this purported $100,000 offer was made, if it was made. But assuming that it was for the 16-game regular season, that's $1.6 million, folks. That's a lot of cheddar, and even 100,000 just by itself is a lot of money. Uh, this also may, there's a couple of things to take away from this. Because um, if true, Stephen Ross is in potentially some deep shit, or maybe not, with gambling laws and federal laws, because he cannot, especially as the owner of a football team, a sporting team, cannot be engaged in fixing games. Oh my god. Especially with the new gambling laws and how gambling has been opened up and made accessible to so many people. Oof. It's it's a bit of a leap of logic, in my opinion, to bring up this this allegation that Brian Flores was told to tank for the first pick in the draft and that he would be paid $100,000 for every loss. It is, how do you connect that to discriminatory hiring practices? Um, I'll be perfectly honest with you. You can potentially make a reasonable argument and say, well, Brian Flores is a minority head coach, so he was set up to fail. Um, because from his first year with the organization, he was told to lose. So that's not a position where anybody could have reasonably expected to keep their job, because they were expected to do poorly, and anybody would have been fine if Brian Flores had gone 0-16. I mean, come on, anybody would have been calling for his job. Only two teams in the 16-game era ever reached the height of 0-16, and those were the Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns. So, share my thoughts at least on this. I I think it's a sell to try to link the alleged tanking orders to discriminatory practices, because you almost can't, because he's already been hired as the as the Miami Dolphins head coach at this point. So the argument would be, well, I was just set up to fail because of my ethnic background. Um, I'll be honest. I think that this is included in their to really have something in the public domain and in the public eye that can create a scandal and twist the NFL and the Miami Dolphins arms to try to settle. Because if this is further investigated or further pursued through this case, it could really bring about a federal investigation from the FBI or or some other law enforcement to investigate whether or not a billionaire NFL owner was fixing games in violation of federal law. Moving on, though, paragraph 15. At the end of the 2019 season, Mr. Ross began to pressure Mr. Flores to recruit a prominent quarterback in violation of league tampering rules. Mr. Flores repeatedly refused to comply with these improper directives. Undeterred, in the winter of 2020, Mr. Ross invited Mr. Flores onto a yacht for lunch. Shortly after he arrived, Mr. Ross told Mr. Flores that the prominent quarterback was conveniently arriving at the marina. Obviously, Mr. Ross had attempted to set up a purportedly impromptu meeting between Mr. Flores and the prominent quarterback. Mr. Flores refused the meeting and left the yacht immediately. After the incident, Mr. Flores was treated with disdain and held out as somebody who was non-compliant and difficult to work with. Okay, it's come out, at least reported on by league insiders, that this prominent quarterback was not the obvious person that everybody thought at first, which was Deshaun Watson, but actually Tom Brady, which is wild to think that Tom Brady considered to go to the Miami Dolphins. Like, that's some Brett Favre shit. Like, I want to be in the same division, and I'm at the Patriots, and I'm just gonna kick their ass. Come on, bro. There's no way. There's no way Tom Brady was gonna play for the Miami Dolphins. They sucked. They were so bad. Uh, Instead, Tom Brady did the smart thing and went to the stacked roster with the good head coach. Sorry, Flores. I don't think you're a good head coach anyway. With a good head coach in Bruce Arians. uh, Again, how does this show discriminatory practices in hiring? Um, it's this just seems like more scandalous um, material, things to feed to the media, to throw fuel to the fire, to try to force a settlement, because a lot of this stuff, again, it probably happens all the time. Probably, tampering rules are broken all the time, or bent a little bit, and Flores is just potentially exposing regular cheating that happens all the time at the NFL level, to try to pressure a settlement. Because again, paragraph 14 and 15, how do you tie back that to the actual claims that he's bringing against the NFL, and at this juncture, at least three football teams? Paragraph 16. From that point forward, Mr. Flores was ostracized and ultimately he was fired. He was subsequently defamed throughout the media and the league as he was labeled by the Dolphins brass as somebody who was difficult to work with. This is reflective of an all too familiar angry black man stigma that is often casted upon black men who are strong in their moral and convictions, while white men are coined as passionate for those very same attributes. Mm, I'm gonna jump the gun here a little bit, but he has here a legal term of art which is defamed. And there's no defamation claim in this lawsuit. We'll discuss that at greater length, but does Brian Flores have a legitimate grievance for how the Dolphins portrayed him post firing? Yes. Was it defamatory? Well, a defense to defamation is truth. So if he was in fact hard to work with and difficult to work with, then what was said about him might not be false because for it to be defamatory, it has to be false. And there is not a defamation claim in this lawsuit. So I've given it away, but that's something to keep in mind. Mr. Mr. Paragraph 17. Thus, last week, defendant New York Football Giants Inc., the Giants or New York Giants, had an opportunity to move a step in the right direction, if even only one. The Giants had the chance to hire Mr. Flores, an eminently qualified black man, to be the first black head coach in the Giants' nearly 100-year history. Paragraph 18. Instead, the New York Giants made the decision to hire Brian Dable and disclosed that decision to third parties during a time when the Giants were scheduled to still interview Mr. Flores and when Mr. Flores was deceptively led to believe he actually had a chance at this job. Something to keep in mind. I don't know if Flores was a fan of the Giants. He is from the area where there are fans of the Giants and the Jets. So while there is a text message later down the line where he says that this would have been his dream job to coach the Giants, surely becoming the head coach of like the team that was closest to him when he grew up in Brooklyn, uh, he must have been really excited for that prospect. So it's sad to hear that he didn't get it. Whether he got it, he didn't get it because of discriminatory practices is uh, another thing altogether. And we'll discuss that greater length when he brings up the Giants in more detail. Paragraph 19. Thus, on Wednesday, January 26, 2022, Mr. Flores was forced to sit through a dinner with Joe Shane, the New York Giants' new general manager, knowing that the Giants had already selected Mr. Dable. Much worse, on Thursday, January 27, 2022, Mr. Flores had to give an extensive interview for a job that he already knew he would not get. An interview that was held for no reason other than for the Giants to demonstrate falsely to the league commissioner Roger Goodell and the public at large that it was in compliance with the Rooney Rule. Paragraph 20. The Giants would likely have gotten away with this most insidious form of discrimination if New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick had not mistakenly disclosed it to Mr. Flores in the below text. And he screenshotted this. Looks like both Bill and Brian are iPhone users. Sound like you landed from Bill Belichick. Sounds like you landed you have landed. Congrats. Did you hear something I didn't hear? Giants? Exclamation point, question mark. I can't believe that 70-year-old Bill Belichick uses exclamation points and question marks like this. I interview on Thursday. I think I have a shot at it. Got it. I hear from Buffalo and New York Giants that you are their guy. Hope it works out if you want it. if you wanted to. That's definitely what I want. I hope you're right, Coach. Thank you. Coach, are you talking to Brian Flores or Brian Dable? Just making sure. And Bill Belichick responds with, "Sorry, I fucked this up. I double checked and misread the text. I think they are naming Dable. I'm sorry about that, BB. Thanks, Bill. Whew, tough scene. Hmm. You know, this could be accidental. And it could be, it could show that the Rooney Rule is really just a farce. Uh, were did the question is, did the New York Giants not hire Brian Flores because of the color of his skin? Well, um, he certainly lays out some inferences and facts to show that you can reach that conclusion, but at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, uh, Bill Belichick's text messages don't really say like, I think you were definitely the guy. It says, oh, I think it's Dable. I don't know if it supposed to. I know it's you. Um, so I'm interested. Like, who does Bill Belichick know within the Giants organization? Like, I know that he worked for the Giants back in the '80s and the '90s, but does he still have contacts there? That's and I mean, as a general manager himself, he would have people that he can communicate. But insider information like this, and I don't know how close Bill Belichick and Brian Flores are, but this is revealing text messages like this. Oof, that's uh, almost like a professional relationship killer because oof. Even if Bill Belichick likes Brian Flores, like people are gonna give Bill Belichick so much shit for this because it does point to a reasonable inference that the Giants may have discriminated against Brian Flores, but it's again discrimination. That's a state of mind. That's saying that you chose not to hire somebody because of their ethnicity, their color of the skin, their background. Um, and at the end of the day, what most likely happened is Joe Shane, former assistant general manager for the Buffalo Bills, got the job at with the New York Giants and wanted to bring in a guy he had worked with while being in Buffalo, and that was Brian Dable. Mm, I don't know if there's anything in here. Would have been interesting. Like, mm, would have been interesting here if he had included specifics about the interview with the Giants as to say this was a farce. I was there just for Rooney Rule compliance because he doesn't do that with the Giants. He does do that later on. Actually, right now we're gonna read it with the Broncos. Moving on, paragraph 21. Incredibly, this was not Mr. Flores' first sham interview that was held only in an effort to comply with the Rooney Rule. Indeed, in 2019, Mr. Flores was scheduled to interview with the Denver Broncos. However, the Broncos' then general manager John Elway, president and chief executive officer Joe Ellis, and others showed up an hour late to the interview. They looked completely disheveled, and it was obvious that they had been drinking heavily the night before. It was clear from the substance of the interview that Mr. Flores was interviewed only because of the Rooney Rule, and that the Broncos never had any intention of to consider him as a legitimate candidate for the job. Shortly thereafter, Vic Fangio, a white man, was hired for the head coach of the Broncos. Now, interestingly, there you see the difference between what he's saying about his experience with the Broncos vis-a-vis his experience with the Giants. He's saying with the Giants, I showed up, and I knew that I didn't get the job, but he's not going to specifics like he was treated poorly or Joe Shane was somehow not engaged with him or not really considered him. Um, but at the same time, I don't know if showing up. Again, there's several leaps of logics here, and I'm not saying that Brian Flores is wrong. I'm just saying it's not all clear that he was discriminated against by the Broncos because he's saying, "Oh, well, I showed up and they were late and they clearly were drunk and disheveled. So the interview that he had with the Broncos was a sham." Dude, maybe the Broncos are just a shitty organization that are drunk all the time and don't know how to act professionally. Um, so to say, the interviewer showed up drunk and late. Maybe he showed up drunk and late for Vic Fangio's interview too. We don't know. Like I said, leap in logic, but not necessarily, you know, not saying that he's wrong. Paragraph 22nd. Having discovered the Giants and the rest of the NFL had hoped to keep in the dark, Mr. Flores now brings this class action complaint to shine a light of the racial injustices that take place inside the NFL and to effectuate real change for the future. Paragraph 23. Among the other relief sought, Mr. Flores now seeks the following injunctive relief. 1. Increase the influence of black individuals in hiring and termination decisions for general manager, head coach, and offensive and defensive coordinator positions. Ensure diversity of ownership by creating and funding a committee dedicated to sourcing black investors to take majority ownership stakes in the NFL. Ensure diversity of decision making by permitting select black players and black coaches to participate in the interviewing process for the general manager, head coach, and offensive and defensive coordinator positions. Increase the objectivity of hiring and termination decisions of general manager, head coach, and offensive and defensive coordinator positions. Require the NFL teams to reduce to writing the rationale for hiring and termination decisions, including a full explanation of the basis for any subjective influences, e.g., trust, personality, interview, performance. Require NFL teams to consider side by side comparisons of objective criteria such as past performance, experience, and objective qualifications. Increase the number of black offensive and defensive coordinators. Create a fund. Create and fund a training program for lower level black coaches who demonstrate an aptitude for coaching and an interest in advancing to a coordinator position. Incentivize the hiring and retention of black general managers, head coaches, and offensive and defensive coordinators throughout monetary draft and or compensation such as additional salary cap space and complete transparency with respect to pay for all general managers, head coaches, and offensive and defensive coordinators. Defendant's conduct has violated Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, Section 1981, the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination, the New York State Human Rights Law, and the New York City Rights Law. All right. That's a lot. That's a lot that Brian Flores is asking for, because not only is he asking for uh where does he, among other relief, Mr. Flores seeks the injunctive relief. I don't, does he not come out of maybe it's at the end in the prayer for relief, but at least here he's among other relief sought. I'm pretty sure among other relief is I want you to pay me a lot of money. Seeks the following injunctive relief. Listen, a lot of this sounds wonderful, and it ideally you would want not only the NFL, but you'd like all of society, all companies to have these sort of rigorous standards when hiring and firing individuals, not just of African descent, but of any descent. This sounds like the ideal way that anybody would want an employer to act when making these sort of hiring and firing decisions. Let me tell you right now that that ain't happening, bro. Uh, no court, no court in I cannot speak for the rest of the world, but I can tell you no court in the United States of America is going to sit down and try to not only figure this out, but then implement it and run it. Because at the end of the day, courts are not in the business of providing this sort of injunctive relief. They're just not. In fact, courts in the United States don't like to grant injunctive relief. And if they're going to grant injunctive relief in any way, it's going to be very simple. And I should actually step back because I say injunctive relief and maybe not all of you know what that means. Injunctive relief means the court orders you to do something. If you are throwing dynamite at your neighbor's lawn every day, the court can order you to stop throwing dynamite at your neighbor's lawn because that's annoying and bad. That's different from monetary relief, given meaning I've been harmed in this way. It's and you should have to pay me X amount for your wrongdoing and your discrimination against me. Courts are not in the business of directing this sort of complicated scheme to avoid discrimination in the NFL. So while ideal, it's I would be very surprised if any court would take the undertaking to try to figure this out, implement it, run it, and then hand it over to the NFL after it's done with its involvement. And as for the NFL itself, whether or not it would agree to do this, uh well, that's what negotiations are for. Maybe they can agree, if this case settles in some way, maybe they would agree to some sort of uh, compromise and to strengthen hiring and firing practices. But some of this stuff is not. It's probably not gonna fly. Like for example, full transparency in hiring and firing. Sorry, no, my bad. Full transparency in salaries between head coaches and general managers. Listen, the salary cap is one thing, and I if I'm not mistaken, the salary cap involves revenue sharing. So like that money is guaranteed between all 32 teams, but employees like head coaches and general managers, that's at the discretion and monies from the institution itself. Pretty sure Jerry Jones can buy can pay his coaches way more than what the Cincinnati Bengals can pay its head coach. So I don't know, man. That would probably have to mean that you'd have to include coaches within the salary cap structure to I don't know. I think that's I see. Even I'm trying to think of a solution for what Brian Flores is asking for, and I can't think of any. Anyway, moving on. Administrative procedures. Paragraph 25. Plaintiff will file a charge of discrimination with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, an administrative prerequisite to filing an action under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, and will amend this action to include claims under Title VII at the appropriate action. The reason why they're doing this is for for some certain claims under discrimination, they have to be filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission first, EEOC. If that doesn't go anywhere, that's when Brian Flores would have would obtain from the EEOC office a right to sue letter, and once he has the right to sue letter, he can then amend this complaint and include the claims under Title VII. Paragraph 26, pursuant to NYCHRL, plaintiff will serve a copy of this complaint upon the New York City Commission of Human Rights and the New York City Law Department office of the Corporation Counsel within 10 days of its filing, thereby satisfying the notice requirement of this action. Paragraph 27, plaintiff has complied with any and all other prerequisites to filing this action. Jurisdiction and venue. The court has jurisdiction over this matter pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1331 and 1343, as this action involves federal questions regarding the deprivation of plaintiffs' rights under Section 1981. The court has supplemental jurisdiction over related state and local claims pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1367A. Just to translate paragraph 28 from legalese to regular speak, you can't just file any sort of claim in federal court. There's very specific types of claims that you can only bring in federal court, and not to make this into a civil procedure lecture. But what this is saying is the Section 1981 law is a federal law, and because Brian Flores is suing under federal law, that gives him a quote-unquote ticket to federal court to be able to file this lawsuit there, as opposed to having to bring it in state court. And supplemental jurisdiction, this is saying that the couple of state law claims that Brian Flores brings up against the defendants in this case are from the what's common. I believe the term is the common nucleus of operative fact as his federal question claim. So because they're closely related, the court also has supplemental jurisdiction over them, even though they are state law claims as opposed to a federal question claim like Section 1981. Paragraph 29. Venue is proper in this district pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1391 because a substantial part of events or omissions giving rise to this action, including certain of the unlawful employment practices alleged herein, occurred in this district. Now, this is interesting because I don't know. On one hand, I mean, you can say we're bringing, because the New York Giants are in New Jersey. They're not in New York, and you've brought this claim in the Southern District of New York. So what happened in the Southern District of New York relevant to your claims, Mr. Flores? On one hand, I know that the NFL is based out of New York, so are you saying that generally, because the NFL is headquartered in New York, that therefore all discriminatory practices emanate from there? Uh, Tough sell. I don't know. But some of this stuff is purposely vague. I'm just saying that looking at this, I think that, if you're on the defense, you can try to bring a motion to dismiss under Rule 12b3 and say no venue here. Go somewhere else. Parties. Paragraph 30. Plaintiff Brian Flores is a black man and former head coach of the Miami Dolphins. Mr. Flores was not only denied the head coaching position of the New York Giants, but was humiliated in the process, as the New York Giants subjected him to a sham interview in an attempt to appear to provide a black candidate with a legitimate chance at obtaining the job. Paragraph 31. Defendant, the National Football League, is a trade association made up of 32 professional football teams and with a principal place of business located at 345 Park Avenue, New York, New York 10154. Defendant, New York Giants. New York Football Giants Inc. is a corporation that owns and operates the New York Giants professional football team. New York Giants Inc. is headquartered at New Jersey, like I said. Okay. Um, Paragraph 33. Defendant Miami Dolphins Ltd. is a corporation that owns and operates the Miami Dolphins professional football team. Miami Dolphins Ltd. is headquartered in Miami Gardens, Florida. Defendant Denver Broncos is a former corporate name. PDB Sports Ltd. is a corporation that owns and operates the Denver Broncos professional football team. The Denver Broncos are headquartered in Englewood, Colorado. Defendants John Doe teams 1 through 29 are intended to identify NFL teams who have engaged in discriminatory conduct towards members of proposed class, including potentially the Arizona Cardinals, Atlanta Falcons, Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, Carolina Panthers, Chicago Bears, Cincinnati Bengals, Cleveland Browns, Dallas Cowboys, Detroit Lions, Green Bay Packers, Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars, Kansas City Chiefs, Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Chargers, Los Angeles Rams, Minnesota Vikings, New England Patriots. Oh, Bill, come on. He's not leaving you out, Bill Belichick. New Orleans Saints, New York Jets, Philadelphia Eagles, Pittsburgh Steelers, San Francisco 49ers, Seattle Seahawks, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tennessee Titans, and or the Washington football team. So he is potentially, leaving the door open for any of these teams to be brought in, depending on how the lawsuit goes. So if you're a fan of any team that's not named in this lawsuit, trust me, plaintiff in this matter seeks to implicate anybody and anyone who he can. Um, Factual allegations. History of race discrimination in the NFL. Paragraph 36. The NFL has a tortured and unacceptable history with race relations that requires immediate focus in the first instance. The league remains mired in a culture that lacks inclusivity and where a barrier to entry still exists today for black professionals in leadership. Paragraph 37. The first iteration of the NFL began in 1920 and it was rife with racism. Before I move on, it has a footnote number 3. The NFL was originally known as the American Professional Football Conference, then the American Professional Football Association, before being renamed to the NFL in 1922. Paragraph 38. From 1920 through 1926, a total of only 9 black players were permitted into the league. At the time, the only reason black players were permitted at all was because the then existing teams had difficulty filling out their rosters in the league's early days. Paragraph 39. Heading into the 1927 season, all 5 of the remaining black players at the time left the league, and from 1927 to 1933, only a handful of black players were permitted to participate. Indeed, during that time frame, there was no more than 1 black player in the league per year. Paragraph 40. In 1933, the league had only 2 black players, but they left at the end of the year, leaving the NFL with 1. At this point, the NFL reportedly financially viable and no longer needed black players to fill vacant positions. Paragraph 41. This led to one of the most despicable moments in the history of professional sports in the United States. It is widely accepted that the NFL used the absence of black players as an opportunity to impose a gentleman's agreement to ban black players entirely. Paragraph 42. This initiative was led by the Washington football team's owner, George Preston Marshall. The league's other founding owners, including but not limited to Tim Mara of the New York Giants, appear to have colluded and cooperated in this widespread racial ban. Oof. Paragraph 43. It was not until 1946 that black players re-entered professional football. Paragraph 44. However, the re-entry of black players into the league was not the result of introspection and a commitment to equality. Rather, when the Cleveland Browns moved to Los Angeles, the publicly funded playing venue, the Los Angeles Coliseum, forced the Rams to integrate at least one black player in order to comply with the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson that banned the segregation in places of public accommodation. Paragraph 45. In fact, it was reported that during a meeting between local officials, community activists, and the Rams general manager Charles F. Walsh, Mr. Walsh admitted to the unwritten racist gentleman's agreement of barring black players. Paragraph 46. As it would happen, the Rams ultimately signed two black players for the 1946 season, but 2 more years would go by before any other team would sign a black player. Paragraph 47. As of 1950, fewer than half of the NFL's 10 teams had signed a black player, and it was not more until than a decade later that the Washington football team signed its first black player. Small aside, I don't know why he's calling it the black the Washington football team. They were the Redskins by then. So like if you really want to hammer in the narrative that the NFL is racist, you do you want to highlight the fact that they were called the Redskins? Anyway, continuing on. Paragraph 48. In 1959, 13 years later, after the start of integration, only 12% of the league's players were black. Paragraph 49. Even as integration slowly progressed, the strain of racism persisted. Teams reportedly put unwritten quotas on how many black players could be signed, and often teams would stack black players at the same position so that they would be eliminated as a matter of competition and roster cuts. It was also reported that black players received less compensation than their white counterparts. Paragraph 50. The NFL only engaged in generally full-scale racial integration when it became economically necessary due to outrage and protest from writers and fans, the emergence of the rival and more racially progressive leagues such as the All-American Football Conference AAFC and the American Football League AFL, and the success of numerous minority athletes in college football. And he cites here to an article that supports the allegations in paragraph number 50. Paragraph 51. Of course, integration was hardly the end of black struggle in the NFL. Untold forms of discrimination still follow black players from team to team, city to city, stadium to stadium, and hotel to hotel. In fact, through the NFL had integrated 23 years earlier, when Washington's owner, Mr. Marshall, died in 1969, he abhorrently stipulated that his estate be used to establish the Redskins Foundation on the condition that it was barred from spending money for any purpose which supports or employs the principle of racial integration in any form. Cites footnote number 6, and seems to be another article. Uh, Paragraph 52. NFL has profited immensely from the racial integration of its players. Initially considered a second-tier sport, the NFL has thrived as an integrated league over the last 75 years. Paragraph 53. While the NFL was forced to racially integrate its players to generate these immense profits, it was not forced to do so in other areas, so it did not. Paragraph 54. It took approximately 20 years for the league to hire its first black official, Burl Toller. Paragraph 55. It is widely known by even casual NFL fans that it took at least the 1980s, approximately 40 years after integration, for teams to generally accept black players at the quarterback position, i.e. Warren Moon and Randall Cunningham. Paragraph 56. It took 43 years for the first black head coach to be hired, Art Shell. Paragraph 57. It took 54 years for the NFL to hire a black general manager, Ozzie Newsome. Paragraph 58. Now, 76 years later, 76 years following integration, there has never been a black commissioner and there has never been a black majority owner of an NFL team. Brief aside, I don't know if there's been any bidders for any African American bidders for an NFL team. I mean, The NBA is predominantly black too, and they're certainly a lot more sensitive to racial issues. And to my knowledge, only Michael Jordan's the only African American owner of a NBA team. So I don't know if ownership is necessarily an issue of race. It might just be that there might not be an owner out there. I say that trepidatiously and hopefully not sounding discriminatory in any way. As for commissioner, um, yeah, I mean, there hasn't been that many commissioners though. There's a difference between head coaches, general managers, there's several of those jobs, but commissioners, like in my lifetime, I've only known of Pete Russell and Roger Goodell. Paragraph 59. For a league and its team owners who have profited immensely of the talent of black players, the NFL has never fully acknowledged its history of racism or taken appropriate steps to address its racial disparities. As black sports writer once wrote, persons, corporations, or businesses almost always forget the people or incidents that made them big. The NFL took all the aid the colored American could give, and then, as soon as it became big league, promptly put a bar up against the very backbone of its existence. Paragraph 60, case in point, Mr. Marshall, in many ways, the personification of the NFL's deep-seated institutional racism is enshrined in the NFL Hall of Fame, and his contributions are lauded by the Hall of Fame's website, with only passing reference to the fact that he endured his share of criticism for not integrating his team until being forced to do so in 1962. That is, the NFL does not even acknowledge, much less condemn Mr. Marshall's role in the league's history of racism. Rather, it only knows that he received criticism from others. Brief aside, I some of this stuff feels to me like the firm that took on this case was ready to jump. Some of the research done here, and the fact that Brian Flores was only fired a couple of weeks ago, and he was still actively interviewing with several teams, leads me to believe that somebody somewhere had this lawsuit typed up already. They just needed a plaintiff. They were looking for somebody, and probably the incident with the Giants is what set off Brian Flores to become the ideal plaintiff for this lawsuit, because this seems to be researched a long time ago, or at least it's difficult to fathom that not too long ago Mr. Flores was about to be interviewed by the Giants, and just a handful of days later, boom, 58-page complaint alleging this widespread racism against not only the teams that interviewed him, but the entire NFL as a whole. Moving on. Section 2, the NFL's ongoing problem with race. Paragraph 61, history shows that the NFL is synonymous with ownership resistance to anti-racist protests, and that continues to the present day. I'm sure that mentions Colin Kaepernick. Yep. Um, Discrimination against Colin Kaepernick. As has been well documented during the 2016 NFL season, Colin Kaepernick protested societal racial injustice by kneeling during the national anthem. Paragraph 63. Following the 2016-17 season, a season in which over the course of 11 games started, he had 16 touchdowns against only 4 interceptions, 468 rushing yards, and a passer rating of 90.7. No NFL team would offer him a job even as a backup. Paragraph 64, even to a casual observer, it was clear that Mr. Kaepernick was more than qualified for a roster spot in the NFL. Paragraph 65, Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll explained the Seahawks rationale for not bringing him in. He's a starter in this league, and we have a starter, but he's a starter in this league, and I can't imagine that someone won't give him a chance to play. Paragraph 66. The New York Giants gave Mr. Kaepernick no consideration and suggested that it was because the team feared black backlash from the fans if it signed Mr. Kaepernick, a statement that journalists understandably labeled dangerous. Paragraph 67. In an August 2017 article titled Colin Kaepernick is Not Supposed to Be Unemployed, the statistics website 538 stated, "It's obvious Kaepernick is being frozen out of for his political opinions, that his no above average quarterback what? That his no above average quarterback has been unemployed nearly as long as Kaepernick, and it's easy to lose sight of the reality that good quarterbacks often never even reach free agency, let alone remain unsigned for so long." Okay, the the Kaepernick situation is it's interesting, and I'll continue reading this, but Kaepernick wasn't a good quarterback. Like a lot of people really lauded him and praised him, but he got figured out after the Ravens 49ers Super Bowl, and he was not effective. He was not a great passer. He was mainly a rushing quarterback. Um, so while certainly people didn't want him because of his political opinions, I think it's a little disingenuous to argue, my God, look at how great he is as a quarterback. He a backup at best. And at the end of the day, do you want your backup to be a distraction? No. Paragraph 68. Mr. Kaepernick's protests received a variety of reactions, both positive and negative, with then President Donald J. Trump, oh my God, siding against him and calling on the nearly all white NFL owners to fire players who protest during the national anthem. President Trump referred a player who protested, clearly referring to Mr. Kaepernick as that son of a bitch. All right, cool. Paragraph 69. In October 2017, meeting among owners, players, and league executives to address. Let me start over. Paragraph 69. In an October 2017 meeting among owners, players, and league executives to address racial injustice protests by players, NFL owners effectively endorsed President Trump's opinion that a player who protests racial injustice is a son of a bitch, and a stated and unwillingness to act contrary to Trump's direct. That's a typo. Um, Paragraph 70. As time went on, still no team would sign Mr. Kaepernick for any role, starter or backup, despite the fact that he clearly deserved such a role based on merit, skill, and experience. Agree to disagree, bud. While some owners gave lip service to solidarity with black players, NFL owners still collectively refused to employ Mr. Kaepernick following his racial justice protest. Paragraph 71. During the During these years, many teams, including the New York Giants, could have used his services as clear roster upgrades to remain blackballed. Eat shit, Giants. You could have used Colin Kaepernick, your quarterbacks. Eat shit. Daniel Jones sucks. Wait. During these years, many teams, including the New York Giants, is he saying, is paragraph 71 like laying shade on Eli Manning? Oh fuck. eat. Paragraph 72. Against the backdrop of the league's history, this conduct remains an appalling example of the league's continued problem with race. Section B. Acquiescence to discrimination by head coach John Gruden. Ooh. Damn. uh... Where does this go? Paragraph 73. John Gruden, 30-year John Gruden. Sorry, I'll go. Let me start again. Paragraph 73. John Gruden, the 30-year-old NFL insider and three-time head coach, is the embodiment of the NFL's acquiescence to racism. Okay, here's an important thing to note. Uh, a very important exception to defamation is anything filed with court, like pleadings. So because this is potentially a defamatory statement for Brian Flores to bring. Uh, and even if you can make the argument, well, John Gruden is in fact a racist, accusing that is defamation per se. So it's a strong statement to make, even if potentially true, given the circumstances. But uh, this is this is the biggest uh bridge burner possible that Brian Flores could have filed, in my opinion. I don't think you can file something like this and expect to have a job with them in the future. Why? I mean, why would you? I mean, the light that you're pointing the league at is like, why would you want to work for them? Paragraph 74. In October 2021, it was disclosed that between 2011 and 2018, Mr. Gruden exchanged a few emails containing racist, misogynistic, and homophobic slurs to Washington football team's then general manager Bruce Allen. Paragraph 75. Mr. Gruden remarked that DeMarcus Smith, the NFL Players Association executive director, had the lips the size of Michelin tires. Paragraph 76. Mr. Gruden also stated that players who protested the national anthem to protest racial inequality should be fired. Paragraph 77. Mr. Smith responded to reports that of these emails saying racism like this comes from the fact that I'm at the same table as they are, and they don't think someone who looks like me belongs. Paragraph 78. As stated, Mr. Gruden's emails also contain a few additional offensive conduct. The email referred to Mr. Goodell as an F word and a clueless anti-football pussy, and Mr. Goodell should not have pressured the Rams to draft quote unquote careers, referring to drafting of Michael Sam, the first openly gay player drafted by an NFL team in 2014, something which the Rams coach has denied. Mr. Gruden also called then United States Vice President Joe Biden a nervous pussy. Damn. Um, Paragraph 79. Mr. Gruden and Mr. Allen also exchanged emails with other members of the Washington football team staff with photos of topless women, including two team cheerleaders. In one paragraph 80, in one email from 2015 that includes several football insiders, including Mr. Allen. Gruden asked Mr. Allen to tell Brian Glazer, part of the family which owns the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to perform oral sex on him. Paragraph 81, Mr. Gruden also mocked Caitlyn Jenner, a transgender former Olympian athlete. Paragraph 82, it simply cannot be a surprise to NFL executive insiders and team owners who have collectively spent the last 3 decades in the proximity of Mr. Gruden that this is who Mr. Gruden is and that these are the beliefs of he harbors. Paragraph 83, nonetheless, Mr. Gruden remained an inner circle candidate for virtually every head coach position for the 10-year period that followed his departure from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2008. Paragraph 84. Ultimately, in 2018, Mr. Gruden received the largest contract in history for an NFL head coach when the Las Vegas Raiders signed him to a 10-year, $100 million deal. Paragraph 85. I don't know if this is true. Pretty sure Bill Belichick has to be getting paid more than John Gruden did. Paragraph 85. The Raiders' hiring of Mr. Gruden occurred in close succession with the Raiders' firing of general manager Reggie McKenzie, one of the few black general managers in the league. Paragraph 86. Under Mr. McKenzie, the Raiders had the highest winning percentage of black players at 82.3, and he won the NFL Executive of the Year award in 2016 after compiling a 12-4 record. Um, Paragraph 87. I should know that after 2016, the Raiders did suck a lot, though. Paragraph 87. Only 2 players later, Mr. McKenzie was fired and replaced by Mike Mayock, a white candidate. Under all white leadership, owner, general manager, and head coach, the percentage of black players on the Raiders decreased every year that followed. By 2021, the percentage of black players on the Raiders roster dropped to 67.2. Um, Paragraph 88. Though Mr. Gruden is no longer employed by the Raiders, it has been reported that the NFL was well aware of Mr. Gruden's offensive emails for several months and took no action. Paragraph 89. When the news of Mr. Gruden's racist emails finally surfaced, rather than an unequivocal rebuke for cause termination, the Raiders allowed him to graciously resign and claimed that it was due to his desire not to be a distraction. This is a little misleading. He was forced to resign, and Gruden filed a lawsuit against the NFL himself. So this paragraph is a little bullshit. Paragraph 90. Mr. Gruden even had the gall to blame the NFL and Mr. Goodell, claiming that they were responsible, not him, for his own action for his termination. It has a citation, an article, so it's doesn't cite to the actual case, but it cites to an article citing the case. Section C, paragraph 91. In 2011, retired NFL players began filing personal injury actions in courts around the country seeking damages or relief in the form of medical monitoring. Some of these actions were filed on behalf of a class, some small groups of former players, and others for individuals, collectively the concussion lawsuits. Paragraph 92. As alleged in the concussion lawsuits, the NFL for decades was aware of the evidence and risks associated with repetitive traumatic brain injuries, but nevertheless ignored, minimized, disputed, and actively suppressed broader awareness of the link between subconcussive and concussive injuries in football and the chronic neurocognitive damage, illness, and decline suffered by former players. Paragraph 93. The NFL was also alleged to have failed to warn players and or impose safety regulations governing this health and safety program, and produced industry-funded biased and falsified research that claimed that concussive and subconcussive head impacts in football do not present serious life-altering risks. Paragraph 94. The concussion lawsuits identified a number of retired NFL players who were diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, TBI, following their playing careers and sought money damages for injury and death, as well as medical treatment for retired players diagnosed with TBI. Paragraph 95. Ultimately, the claims were consolidated and settled in 2014. Under the settlement agreement, a former player who has a qualifying diagnosis is eligible for monetary benefits. A diagnosis is qualifying primarily but not exclusively if rendered by physicians approved by the NFL or conjunction with the NFL's Baseline Assessment Program, BAAP. The BAP is intended both to identify symptoms of eligible conditions and to collect data for comparisons to later testing to establish and subsequent decline in retired players' cognitive functioning. Paragraph 96. Claims for monetary awards are first reviewed by claims administrator. In the first instance, any appeals of the claims administrator's determinations are heard by an appeal advisory panel. Any appeals from the appeals advisory panel are brought to the court that entered the settlement agreement. Paragraph 97. According to a lawsuit filed by former black NFL player Kevin Henry and Najee Davenport, as well as media reports, the NFL began to regularly insist that physicians use race norms in determining whether a retiree had suffered cognitive impairment, the race norming lawsuit. When black retirees were deemed to be cognitively impaired, the NFL regularly appealed such determination if race norming was not used. Paragraph 98. As alleged in the race norming lawsuit, the National Football League has been avoiding paying head injury claims under the settlement agreement based on a formula for identifying qualifying diagnosis that explicitly and deliberately discriminates on the basis of race. When being evaluated for the qualifying diagnosis of neurocognitive impairment, black players are automatically assumed, though a statistical manipulation called race norming, to have started with worse cognitive functioning than white former players. As a result, if a black former player and a white former player receive the exact same raw score on a battery of tests designed to measure their current cognitive functioning, the black player is presumed to have suffered less impairment, and he is therefore less likely to qualify for compensation. Put another way, the NFL insisted that white people simply have better cognitive function than black people. Thus, if a black person was found to be cognitively impaired, the NFL would often not accept the diagnosis unless the physician gave adequate consideration to the possibility that black people simply do not function cognitively as well as white people. This is the very definition of racism, the assumption that someone is not smart as another person because of the color of his or her skin. Oof. Damning, damning, damning. All very inflammatory and very, uh, very concerning stuff here. Though, again, keep your eye on the ball. I just read off a bunch of paragraphs about plenty of wrongdoing from the NFL from its inception to current standards. Why is this in the lawsuit when Mr. Flores is alleging that he was discriminated against? He personally. Again, a lot of this is in there to paint a narrative. And a narrative that may be true. Maybe Brian Flores was in fact discriminated against. But the reason why a lot of this was included in the complaint was not to show that he was in fact discriminated against by the New York Giants, but rather to show a tendency of the NFL to discriminate against black players, and therefore he wants you to conclude that because it has happened in the past to other people, that it has obviously happened to him. However, that's not how it works. He has to show that he was in fact discriminated against himself, not that because all this stuff has happened in the past, that he was therefore harmed. Not quite how it works. Sorry. Section D, paragraph 100. In June 2020, following protests over George Floyd's murder and other instances of racially charged violence, Roger Goodell publicly apologized for the league's previous response to players' protests, saying, "We were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier." Paragraph 101. Goodell further encouraged all to speak out and peacefully protest, and said, "Without black players, there would be no National Football League, and the protests around the country are emblematic of centuries of silence, inequality, or oppression of black players, coaches, fans, and staff." I wanna. I don't. I personally don't care for a lot of the citations used in this complaint to say, hey, look how the NFL has admitted that it is racist, and they're quoting to NFL officials like Roger Goodell saying, "We need to do better. We want to do better. We were wrong in the past to suppress voices that were speaking out against racial injustice, and say, see, the NFL is racist." Listen, I'm not saying that the NFL is not racist. I'm just saying Goodell's comments, like Goodell's he's in many ways not a great individual. There's a reason why everybody boos him at the draft. But I think at least when he came out, he was sincere about this topic. And I'm just a little uncomfortable with it being used against the NFL when it seemed to me like a sincere attempt to change the culture in NFL teams and to be, more like the NBA and be open minded and open to discussions about racism and racial injustices in the country. Um, I just think that the NFL is a lot more open minded and inclusive in 2022 than it was in 2018. Uh, Paragraph 102. Despite the blatant collusions against him, Mr. Goodell declared in a publicly released video that Black Lives Matter and announced that the NFL decided to work with Mr. Kaepernick in the creation and distribution of a quarter of a billion foundation for social justice initiative. Paragraph 103. These remarks and actions emblematic of the phrase too little too late were largely ridiculed by the public as hypocritical and an obvious attempt to pander to growing public sentiments against racial injustice. Racial discrimination requires real and meaningful attention, not mere sound bites when it is in the league's financial interest. Listen, the league's financial interests are for you to shut up and dribble. I know it's football, not basketball, but the league. You think the league wants to spend $250 million on anything that's not making generating revenue? Not really. Like, are you really going to? That's a lot of money. Is it too little, too late? Maybe, but I this goes a little too far, in my opinion. But I'm not making a legal judgment on paragraph 103. I'm making more of a personal opinion aspect. Personal opinion uh, pronouncement there. Moving on. Section 3: Lack of black coaches and the failure of the Rooney Rule. Paragraph 104. Troy Vincent, a black Hall of Fame former cornerback and current NFL executive vice president of football operations, recently stated with regard to the treatment of black head coaches in the NFL. There is a double standard, and we've seen that. And you talk about the appetite for the acceptable. Let's go back. Let's just go back to Coach Dungy and wait, we already yeah, we already read this up top. There's no reason to read again. Paragraph 105. Mr. Vincent's common sense analysis of the NFL's predicament with respect to the lack of black coaches hits the nail on the head. There is a double standard. This double standard has led to a consistent dearth of black coaches, despite an abundance of highly qualified candidates. For black head coaches who are hired, retention of the job is routinely more difficult than for white counterparts. Paragraph 106. Historically, head coach positions were close to black candidates until Art Shell broke this color barrier in 1989. Still, Mr. Shell was only one of the 5 black head coaches between the then and 2003. As one sports writer noted, in 2003, NFL franchise owners had to be prodded to seriously consider black candidates to coach their teams. They were willing to sign black players to make them money while risking their health. They were reluctant to let them lead their teams after they were done playing. This was a reference to what is commonly known as the Rooney Rule. 107. By way of brief background, in 2002, Johnny L. Cochran, civil rights attorney, Cyrus Mary, and Johnny Cochran also O.J. Simpson's lawyer. Cyrus Mary and labor economist Dr. Janice Madden together produced a detailed report on the NFL's head coaching hiring practices entitled Black Coaches in the National Football League: Superior Performance, Inferior Opportunities. The report analyzed the NFL's hiring and firing practices over the previous 15 seasons, and the statistics showed evidence of discrimination, including that black coach candidates were less likely to be hired, that black head coaches were likely to be fired. Paragraph 108. Due to the public sentiment gathering to address this problem on October 31, 2002, the NFL appointed Committee on the Workplace Diversity headed by Pittsburgh Steelers president Dan Rooney to study the issue further. On December 20, 2002, this committee issued its recommendation, including the NFL teams make a commitment to interview minority candidates for every head coach opening, with limited exceptions. In 2002, the owners approved this recommendation. Paragraph 109. Since its passage, the Rooney Rule has been amended several times in an effort to strengthen its impact on diversity and inclusion, or at least to appear to do that. It now applies to general managers and other front office positions, as well as assistant head coach and coordinator positions. Moreover, teams are now required to interview two minority head coach candidates and at least one in person. However, the Rooney Rule has failed to yield any meaningful change to an institution so fully steeped in discriminatory practices. Paragraph 110. In the 20 years since the Rooney Rule was passed, only 15 head coaching positions have been filled by black candidates. During that time, there have been approximately 129 head coaching vacancies, thus only 11% of head coaching positions have been filled by black candidates. In a league where 70% of players are black, with few exceptions, the black candidates who have obtained head coaching positions have been on a short leash and lasted for extremely short periods, while white candidates have much lengthier opportunities to prove their worth. In addition, upon information and belief, in general, black coaches at all levels are paid less than similarly qualified than paid less than similarly qualified white coaches. Paragraph 111. Indeed, not a single one of the 10 black head coaches hired since 2012 still holds his head coach job today. In contrast, approximately 25% of white head coaches hired during the same time frame remain employed as head coach. Moreover, since 2012, black head coaches have been fired in an average of 2.5 years, whereas accounting for head coaches that are expected to return next year. White head coaches have averaged nearly 3.5 years on the job. Put another way, white head coaches are afforded an entire additional year to establish themselves relative to black head coaches. Paragraph 112. Moreover, since 1978, only 16 teams have fired their head coach 3%, even though black men only held a small fraction of the head coach positions during that time. An astounding 25%, 4 of the 16 of the head coaches fired after a winning season were black. This statistic is even more remarkable given that there have only ever been 17 head coaches who have coached a full season, and 4 of them, 23.5, were fired after a season. In contrary, only 6.9 of white coaches were fired after a winning season, 12 out of 174. Thus, black head coaches are 3.5 times more likely to be fired when successful. Those are some damning statistics, if true. Paragraph 113. Moreover, unsuccessful white coaches routinely get second and third chances in critical positions, including as a head coach or offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. Indeed, according to a 2021 NFL Diversity and Inclusion report, since 1963, 116 white individuals have been hired as a head coach or coordinator after an initial head coach opportunity, whereas only 21 individuals of color have received the same second chance. The same report noted that only one person of color has received 3 head coaching opportunities, whereas 15 white men have received 3 head coaching opportunities. 2 of the 15 received 4 opportunities. Paragraph 114. Thus, while the Rooney Rule was and remains well intentioned, its effectiveness requires NFL teams to take it seriously and not treat it as a formality that must be endured simply to formalize the predetermined hiring of a white coach. Moreover, it requires that teams provide black head coaches a fair and legitimate chance, a chance to commensurate with the circumstances and comparable to the chances given to white head coaches to thrive. Paragraph 115. But that has not happened. As a result, following the recent termination of Mr. Flores and David Culley, former head coach of the Houston Texans, there is currently only one black head coach out of the NFL teams. The following photo array speaks for itself. Yeah, that's a lot of white people. Um, I'll be honest. I I think this is Kyle Shanahan, and I think this is Cliff Kingsbury, but I can't tell the difference. I think they look. Am I racist? No, I'm pretty sure that's Kyle Shanahan. And this guy is Cliff Kingsbury. I can't tell them apart. It's difficult anyway. Paragraph 116. At the time the Rooney Rule was instituted almost 20 years ago, there were three black head coaches. There is now only one. That marks a complete lack of improvement and, in fact, a move backwards in the wrong direction. 117, as was recently well put by sports writer Jamel Hill, most NFL owners have been white men and they have seldom been willing to let African Americans or Latinos call plays, either on the field or from the sidelines. This is no different from when franchises presumed that black players weren't smart enough to play quarterback and lacked leadership skills to command men. The league's paltry record of hiring minority head coaches come from the same mindset, and its primary effort to address the problem has been a failure because a policy can compensate for ignorance. If the NFL wants to create an equitable system for minority head coaches, the owners can't rely on a rule to create institutional change. Paragraph 118. Ms. Hills continued, NFL owners must recognize that their lazy stereotypes of black male leadership have created this embarrassing problem. In time, we'll see whether they have the courage to fix it. As has been evidenced by the New York Giants head coach search and treatment of Mr. Flores, the NFL and its teams clearly do not. I mean, again, this is plaintiff has laid out a lot of issues and a lot of problems that the NFL has faced when it comes to diversity and doing away with um, racial problems within its ranks. But I mean, again, he keeps claiming that the Giants that the uh, that the Giants discriminated against him and that they his interview was a sham interview. But when given the opportunity, like plaintiff did not describe in detail why the interview with the Giants was a sham, like he did with the Broncos. And at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. So Joe Shane knew Brian Dable, and probably Brian Dable was number one in his list with a bullet. Um, and maybe he was, it is possible that he was open to the possibility of maybe hiring Brian Flores. It's just that Brian Flores didn't impress Joe Shane enough to change his mind. But at the same time, it could be that, you know, plaintiff is right in his allegations. I just don't think that the complaint lays out enough um, to make that case. Not that it needs to, but we'll see if it even has enough to potentially survive a motion to dismiss. But again, that's getting way ahead of myself. Section 4, paragraph 119. Before that, racial disparities extend to coordinator and general manager positions. Paragraph 19. Racial disparities also exist in the hiring and retention of at coordinator positions as well. Offensive and defensive coordinators are significantly overrepresented by white candidates and underrepresented by black candidates. These positions are often filled by pool of former players, approximately 7% of whom are black. Paragraph 120. Currently, there are only 4 black offensive coordinators in the team's 32 leagues, 12.5%, and 11 black defensive coordinators, 34%. Uh, Paragraph 121. This is significant given that according to the NFL's Diversity and Inclusion report covering 2012 through 2021, published in February 2021. Team focus on coordinators, in particular offensive coordinators, when it comes to considering candidates for head coaching positions. During this period, approximately 80% of head coaches hires were previously coordinators. Paragraph 122. According to the study, 31 of the 62 head coaching positions were filled by offensive coordinators, where black professionals are the most underrepresented, while 18 head coaching positions were filled by defensive coordinators. Moreover, only 3 out of the 32 teams have a black quarterbacks coach, which is the position that most often leads to an offensive coordinator opportunity. This figure is not entirely surprising given that the NFL's history of racism when it comes to the quarterback position. Paragraph 123. This shows that not only are the NFL's head coaches predominantly white, but that the pipeline feeding this racial disparity is fraught with discrimination. This is indicative of the structural discrimination that pervades NFL teams, likely ensures that this problem will remain. In some, NFL teams are more willing to hire black professionals into positions they deem less important and less likely to lead to head coach positions. Paragraph 124. The same discriminatory practices are apparent when it comes to hiring general managers. Currently, out of the 32 teams, there are only 6 black general managers, 18.75 against 26 white general managers, seen below. Look at Jerry Jones. uh, Paragraph 125. According to the NFL's Diversity and Inclusion report from 2012 through 2021, there were 37 general managers vacancies and only 6 were filled by black candidates, 16%. 20 NFL teams have never had a black general manager. 126. The NFL's inability to achieve racial diversity at the head coach positions stems from this is a typo, right? Head coach position stems from both the pipeline flowing up as well as the decision makers at the top. The lack of representation of black general managers doubtlessly leads to the lack of black head coaches. Paragraph 127. It stands to reason whether explicit or implicit white decision makers tend to favor white candidates for significant positions, as numerous studies suggest there is same race bias in decision making. Organizational studies have shown that people are most likely to hire others of the same race, and that bias amongst decision makers can affect the diversity of the entire organization. This helps explain the structural problems that lead to a lack of black professionals in both head coaching and in the pipeline at coordinator positions. To that end, the NFL has no black owners. Yeah, there's more than 32. Oh, yeah, no, not just one people. Sorry for coughing into the microphone. Ugh. Paragraph 129. Owners are ultimately responsible for leading the entire organization, establishing an inclusive culture, deciding to hire and retain in front office leadership positions general managers. The lack of any black voices in ownership clearly has led to a dearth of opportunities for black general managers, which has in some undermined racial inclusions in the NFL's more than 100 years. All right. So, we've talked about Brian Flores and this complaint for a little bit. We are now past the halfway mark of this 58-page document, and it's on now, page 33 that it seems that we're gonna have some significant discussion on Brian Flores himself. In fact, just to do a little exercise here, let's control search something really quickly. Flores in this ginormic document Flores' name only comes up 94 times. Uh, let's see, discrimination. 124. Ooh, I need to go back to where we were, page 33. All that to say is, it feels disproportional, like how little Brian Flores himself is mentioned in this complaint, vis-a-vis all this other background information on the NFL and its history, and even going so far as to bring in the concussion lawsuits, which I don't think have anything to do with race. It's just the NFL being shitty. Uh, all that to say, like, I just have this deep suspicion that this lawsuit was just ready to go, and they just needed a plaintiff, and Brian Flores just came by, and they just plugged in his information here and there, but all this stuff was already researched and pre drafted in a complaint that these lawyers wanted to file. Again, I don't have any information on that. I just say that that's what this looks like. Section 5. Noticeable regional examples of discrimination conduct. A. Brian Flores. Background on Brian Flores. Paragraph 130. Mr. Flores, son of Honduran immigrants, grew up in the housing projects in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York. Mr. Flores managed to navigate and avoid the perils of drugs, gangs, and violence in in one of the city's toughest neighborhoods, and grew to love his home neighborhood and city. As it was put by a childhood friend, Brownsville is the trenches, and Brian was like a rose growing out of the concrete. Paragraph 131. Mr. Flores excelled academically and began playing football. After a successful high school and college playing career, Mr. Flores was hired as a scout by the New England Patriots, and in 2008 transitioned to a coaching position. Mr. Flores received multiple promotions, and during his tenure, the Patriots appeared in 5 Super Bowls, winning 3 of them. In the last of these Super Bowls, when Mr. Flores called the Patriots defensive plays, the Patriots led the Los Angeles Rams to 3 points, tied for the fewest ever in a Super Bowl. Paragraph 132. In 2019, on the heels of his outstanding performance with the Patriots, Mr. Flores was offered the Miami Dolphins head coaching position. By all accounts, Mr. Flores did a fantastic job in these in 3 seasons from 2019 to 2021. In his first year, Miami's gutted roster won 5 games despite many experts predicting an 0-16 season and one of the worst teams in NFL history. First up, buddy, come on. 2021, you started 1-7. You know, you're not that good. Like, uh, you didn't make the playoffs in your 3 years. Like, settle the fuck down. Uh, oh, Mr. Flores is so good. You got a roster. Like, dude, from all accounts, it seems that Minka Fitzpatrick left because of you. Like, you did some of the gutting yourself. Anyway, paragraph 133. The Dolphins owner, Stephen Ross, was unhappy with this performance, not because it was underperforming. To the contrary, Mr. Flores Mr. Ross wanted the Mr. Flores to tank the season to put the team in a position to secure the first pick in the draft. Indeed, during the 2019 season, Mr. Ross told Mr. Flores that he would pay him $100,000 for each game lost that year. Then, when the Dolphins started winning games, due in no part to Mr. Flores' coaching, Mr. Flores was told by the team's general manager, Chris Greer, that Steve was mad, and that Mr. Flores' success in winning games that year was compromising the team's draft position. I've already talked about why it's a bit of a leap in logic as to why this just makes Stephen Ross and the Dolphins look bad, and they are a bad organization. Fuck you, Dolphins. But Um, again, leap in logic. Um, from this to saying that he was discriminated against, and I just think this is fodder for the media to try to twist the arm of the NFL for a settlement. I think this is probably like Brian Flores waving his hand and saying like, "Hey, I have all this dirt on you. If you don't settle, well, we'll I'll expose you for what you are." Um, Paragraph 134. After the end of the 2019 season, Mr. Ross began to pressure Mr. Flores to recruit a prominent quarterback in violation of league tampering rules. Mr. Flores repeatedly refused to comply with these improper directives. Undeterred, in the winter of 2020, Mr. Ross invited Mr. Flores on toy. I would have already read this. Paragraph 135. Over the remaining year and a half of Mr. Flores' tenure at the helm of the Miami Dolphins, he was routinely made to feel uncomfortable based upon his decision not to tank in order to secure the top pick in the 2019 draft. Upon information and belief, no white head coach has ever been subjected to such ridicule over winning and the spirit holding the spirit of the game in such high regard. I've never seen that word. In fact, Mr. Flores was ultimately terminated and subsequently defamed throughout the media and the league as he was labeled by the Dolphins brass as somebody who was difficult to work with. This is reflective of an all too familiar angry black man stigma that is often casted upon black men who are strong in their morals and convictions while white men are coined as passionate. Paragraph 136. In the following year, in 2020, despite this discriminatory treatment, the Dolphins improbably won 10 games, narrowly missing the playoffs, and Mr. Flores was mentioned as a potential Coach of the Year candidate. And I should note that it was the Buffalo Bills who kicked your ass at the end of the year and kept you from the playoffs. Because fuck you, Dolphins. Buffalo Bills fan Bryce Vega here. Sorry. In 2021, Miami again finished with a winning record, and fans, pundits, and experts all agree the team played extraordinarily hard for Mr. Flores. Nonetheless, Mr. Flores was terminated just 3 years into his 5-year contract with the Dolphins. He was told that he was being terminated for poor collaboration, which itself has discriminatory undertones. How? Um, Paragraph 137. Mr. Flores' only failure to collaborate was his refusal to tank the 2019 season as had been requested by Mr. Ross when he refused and then overperformed and led the team to winning records in 2 consecutive seasons with a roster few experts predicted could do so. He was fired. Mr. Flores was discharged from his duties as the Dolphins head coach on January 10, 2022. Countless current and former players, executives, and media analysts expressed their dismay at Mr. Flores' termination, and he immediately became one of the top head coaching candidates on the market. Well, buddy, those jobs are closing in, so I don't know what you're talking about. And you're suing the NFL. So let's not, you know, you interviewed with a lot of teams, Brian Flores. He interviewed with to my knowledge, he's interviewed with the Giants, the Houston Texans, who could really use a coach, the Chicago Bears. Did he interview with the Jaguars? I don't think so. But he's interviewed with quite a few of the teams that have open positions, and none of you are hiring. Not sorry, none of them are hiring you. So, uh, you come to your own conclusions. He's not getting these jobs. He's suing the NFL. It doesn't paint a good light, in my opinion, for Brian Flores himself, but we'll see. Paragraph 139. This section over here, the New York Giants subject Mr. Flores to a sham interview. 139. it is against this backdrop that the Giants should have considered Mr. Flores as a highly regarded candidate for the head coach position, and for nearly 2 weeks, it at least publicly appeared that the Giants viewed Mr. Flores as a desirable option. Indeed, on January 11, 2022, the day that the Giants terminated head coach Joe Judge, Mr. Flores received a text message from Tim McDonald, the Giants' co-director of player personnel. The two spoke via telephone, and according to Mr. McDonald, the Giants and owner John Mara were extremely interested in hiring him for the team's vacant head coach position. Later that day, see, and this is weird because at the time, they're doing this. They interviewed him on January 11th. Guess where Brian Day? I mean, well, not that Brian Dable couldn't interview, but the Bills were still in the playoffs when this happened, and it's difficult to, for me at least, to think that not only did you get an interview, you got two interviews because you got the second interview at the end of January. So if you're claiming discrimination, why did they and that it was all for a Rooney Rule compliance? The Rooney Rule just says that you have to interview at least two candidates, not that you have to interview them twice. There's no requirement for the NFL to, sorry, for NFL teams to interview you more than once. They could interview you once and say like, this is the guy, we're going with him. So it's a tough argument to overcome, in my opinion. Um, Paragraph 141. Later that day, after the two texted about potential general manager and assistant coach coordinator candidates, Mr. McDonald let Mr. Flores know that Mr. Mara would be reaching out directly to him to express his interest. Mr. Flores let Mr. McDonald know that the Giants head coach position would be his dream job. The following day, on January 12, 2022, Mr. Mara and Mr. Flores had a positive conversation about his candidacy for the head coaching position. This was followed up with a Zoom meeting on Tuesday, January 18, 2022. On the morning of Sunday, January 23, 2022, Mr. Shane, who had recently been announced as the Giants' new general manager, beating out multiple black candidates for the job, began the process of scheduling an interview with Mr. Flores. The same day, in the mid-afternoon, Mr. McDonald told Mr. Flores that he hoped that Mr. Flores would come in and win the effing job. On Monday, January 24, 2022, Mr. Shane finalized Mr. Flores' interview date for January 27, 2022. Unfortunately, just hours later, Mr. Flores learned that the Giants' continued courtship was nothing more than a discriminatory facade designed to show false compliance with the Rooney Rule. Does it? They interviewed you already. How does the second interview comply with the Rooney Rule? I Maybe I'm misunderstanding the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule just asks for head coaches for you to at least consider two candidates, not that you have to interview like two candidates twice or one twice and one once. I mean, you're getting a second interview. Like, for all intents and purposes, what I think happened was the Giants were interested in Mr. Flores before Joe Shane came in. They interviewed him. It went well. Joe Shane comes in. Joe Shane says, I kind of like my guy, Brian Dable from the Buffalo Bills. Let's bring him in. And the Giants organization told him, okay, maybe, but can you at least give Brian Flores a chance and interview him? He did, and he still went with Brian Dable for, potentially not discriminatory reasons. I Like I said at the outset, I don't think legally this is the strongest case he could be making or can make. Um, Potentially, what happened with the Broncos was a lot more scandalous. Anyway, um, Paragraph 147. Indeed, on January 24, 2022, at 2:30 p.m., Mr. Flores received a text message from New England Patriots head coach, clearly an insider and privy to non-public information from direct sources. The ensuing text messages from Mr. Belichick to Mr. Flores speak for themselves. We've already gone through them. Paragraph 148. Clearly, by midday Monday, January 24, 2022, the Giants had already decided to hire Brian Dable, and communicated the decision to third parties, including to Mr. Belichick. Paragraph 149. But for Mr. Belichick's error, Mr. Flores never would have known this fact. This lets me know again, the lawsuit was probably geared up, and the incident with the Belichick text messages was what set all this into motion. This revelation not only impugns and viciously exposes the sham process to which Mr. Flores was subjected, but also stands to indict the Giants organizational hiring practices in general. Paragraph 150. It is impossible to put into words the emotions Mr. Flores felt upon learning that not only would he not be getting the Giants head coach job, the job of his dreams, but more importantly, that he was not even being given serious consideration for the position, but being treated as a box to check off due to his race. 151. Mr. Flores spent Monday evening, Tuesday, and Wednesday, including dinner with Mr. Shane, knowing that he was walking into Thursday's interview with no chance to become the Giants head coach, while he would spend countless hours preparing to put his best step forward. The white men across the table from him saw and heard only one thing, a formality that had to be observed in order to name Mr. Dable the head coach. Damn. Um, the Giants' treatment of Mr. Flores is consistent with its past. 152. The Giants, in particular, have an ominous history when it comes to race relations, and in particular, when it comes to hiring black coaches. The Giants have never hired a black head coach. Mr. Flores would have been the team's first. This is a near unbelievable fact given that the Giants have been in existence for nearly 100 years and would have hired 22 coaches. It is made even worse given that approximately 70% of the players in the NFL are black, and the organization sits in the nexus of New York's New Jersey community, which prides itself on diversity and inclusion. 154. Year after year, the Giants have interviewed black candidates for open head coach positions, likely due only to requirements of the Rooney Rule, without ever hiring one. This is a leap. It's you're arguing because of the conclusion, therefore racism could be, but this gets to mental state. 151. In 2004, the Giants hired Tom Coughlin after interviewing Romeo Crennel, who would go on to receive head coach positions with the Cleveland Browns, Kansas City Chiefs, and Houston, Texas, and Lovie Smith, who would go on to receive a head coach position with the Chicago Bears, who he took to the Super Bowl in 2006, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 156. After Tom Coughlin left the organization in 2016, the Giants hired Ben McAdoo after interviewing Terrell Austin, the highly qualified black defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. 157. When Mr. McAdoo was terminated after just 2 years, the Giants hired Pat Shurmur after interviewing Steve Wilks and Eric Stutzville, two highly qualified black candidates. After Mr. Shurmur was fired just 2 years later, the Giants passed over Eric Bieniemy, who many considered to be the best head coach prospect on the market, as well as Chris Richard, and instead hired Joe Judge, who himself was fired after just 2 years. I'll just give my opinion on this one, on Joe Judge. I just think that out of all these guys, Joe Judge was the only one willing to give a commitment to Daniel Jones. So I can't imagine Eric Bieniemy, after working with Patrick Mahomes, looking at Daniel Jones and saying like, yeah, we can win with this guy. That's just setting yourself up to failure. 159. More to the point, only once since the passage of the Rooney Rule have the Giants even interviewed more than the minimum number of black candidates for head coach, and it is not for a lack of qualified candidates. This demonstrates the Giants interview black candidates because of the NFL's mandate and for no other reason. I wonder if that's interesting information to have because it's not like the NFL. It's not like teams always publish who they're interviewing. So I wonder how he has this information. Paragraph 160. Oh, prior sham interview with Denver Broncos. Oh no, he goes over this. Cool. 160. Incredibly, this was not Mr. Flores' first sham interview that was held only in an effort to comply with the Rooney Rule. Indeed, in 2019, Mr. Flores was scheduled to interview with the Denver Broncos. However, Denver Broncos general manager. Okay, we've read this. He was drunk. Everybody showed up bad. Sadly, while the Rooney Rule was meant to lift the NFL from its history of insidious gentlemen agreements, segregation, and racism, the Giants' actions toward Mr. Flores fit that history all too well. Um, See, just to go back over this, like he talks a lot about what the Giants did and of its past, and that the fact that they've never had a black head coach candidate in 100 years, which again, I mean, it's certainly not a good look for the Giants. It's something that they can point to in this case to try to argue it plaintiff's position, but it just the specifics about the interview itself, which even the complaint makes that there was a pleasant conversation with John Mara, the owner of the team, and that nothing in the allegations indicate that they were rude or impatient with Mr. Flores. For anything, it looked like the interview that he may have been considered as a serious candidate. And I just have the even though Joe Shane was eventually hired by the Giants, the Giants I think wanted a Belichick disciple. Um, they really like Joe Judge. I get the feeling that they wanted some of that Patriot success, even though nobody has yet to replicate it, other than maybe Bill O'Brien, but that's debatable. Section B, the hiring of Steve Mariucci, in paragraph 162 in 2003. Soon after the Rooney Rule was adopted, Detroit Lions were looking for a head coach, and team president Matt Millen made it clear that the team expected to hire Steve Mariucci. Paragraph 163, likely because the Lions' intentions to hire Mr. Mariucci was made so well known, five minority coaching candidates included Dennis Green, who had a 97 to 62 record as the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings for 10 seasons, understandably turned down interviews. Paragraph 64. Similarly to the Giants with Mr. Flores, the Lions were looking to interview black candidates not because of any genuine intent to give any of them a fair shot at the job. It was only an attempt to engage in false compliance with the Rooney Rule. Paragraph 65. The NFL determined that the Rooney Rule had been violated and fined the team a paltry $200,000. Paltry to you? I would love $200,000. Section C, Jim Caldwell fired after winning seasons and replaced by white coaches. Oh, and I should know because he's bringing up Jim Caldwell, and he'll bring up Eric Bieniemy. Like, I think this is a warning, not a warning shot. This is like a flare being set up. It's like, hey guys, anybody want to join me in this crusade against the NFL? And we'll see if anybody takes him up on that. It's difficult, at least for me, to say like maybe Jim Caldwell would be somebody like on one end. Jim Caldwell should have definitely been a coach after his stint with Detroit. He phenomenal coach, um, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to say like, well, Jim Caldwell has been discriminated against. Well, he did get two head coaching jobs, and not everybody gets that many opportunities. But again, this complaint does make the argument that white coaches do get more opportunities, second, third, even fourth opportunities than black candidates do. So there's that. But at the same time, like it's always sad to hear year after year like people are bringing in Jim Caldwell for interviews, and it just feels more and more that it's for Rooney Rule compliance. So I get it. 166 in 2009, Jim Caldwell was hired as the Indianapolis Colts head coach. 167. The team went 14-2 in his first year and made it to the Super Bowl, followed by a 10-6 record and the AFC South Division title for a second year in a row. A total record of 27-8 over his first two seasons. The following years, the Colts lost their starting quarterback Peyton Manning, around whom their entire team had been built around, and the team fell to 2-14. Despite his past success and justifiable reasons for his poor record in one season out of three, Mr. Caldwell was fired. That 2-14 season though. Um, 170 in 2014, the Detroit Lions hired Mr. Caldwell. In his first year, the team won 11-5, a a 4 game improvement from the previous year. The Lions fell to 7-9 in 2015, but rebounded to 9-7 in 2016 and made it to the playoffs. The Lions were 9-7 again in 2017, but missed the playoffs. Thus, Mr. Caldwell had three winning seasons in 4 years for one of the historically worst franchises in the NFL. Eat shit, Lions. 172. He had an aggregate record of 36-28, a winning percentage of 563, the best winning percentage of any Lions head coach since 1950s. The Lions also had two playoff berths in 4 years, as compared to one playoff appearance in the previous 14 seasons. 173. Nonetheless, Mr. Caldwell was fired the day after his fourth season. 174. The Lions have gone 17-46 since his departure, with only white head coaches, including no playoff appearances and no season with any greater than 6 wins. 175. In more than 3 years since losing the Lions job, Mr. Caldwell has not received any further opportunities as a head coach, despite numerous openings and interviewing no fewer than 5 times for different positions. Section D, double standard treatment of Steve Wilkes. In 2018, the Arizona Cardinals hired Steve Wilkes, a longtime NFL coach for several franchises. He led the team to a disappointing 3-13 record in his first season. However, it was his first season, and he was not given any time to develop the team or culture, and he was struck with numerous burdens not of his own making. He had a rookie quarterback in Josh Rosen, ninth pick. The team GM, Steve Keim, was suspended for 5 weeks following a DUI during training camp, and the Cardinals had numerous injuries to key players. Mr. Keim, a white GM, kept his job, but Mr. Wilkes was fired. 178. The next head coach, Cliff Kingsbury, went 5-10 in his first year with Kyler Murray as a rookie quarterback, first pick, and he retained his job and was given time to improve. That's that's a fair comparison, but it's like a different feel because like the the Cardinals were bad under Wilkes. Like that's like they couldn't move the ball. At least the 5-10 record with Kyler Murray in his first year, like they at least made it a game in a lot of the games that they lost. But the Josh Rosen year was disastrous. Um, Discriminatory treatment of David Culley. 179. David Culley has been a collegiate and NFL coach for more than 45 years, including 27 years in the NFL. 180. Despite his reputation and success, Mr. Culley was never hired into an offensive or defensive coordinator position. 181. However, in January 2021, the Houston Texans hired Mr. Culley to be head coach. Hired Mr. Culley to be head coach, to be the head coach, right? Though it was widely considered to be one of the most difficult situations for a first year head coach in memory. 182. The previous season, the Texans went 4-12 despite having no Pro Bowl. Despite having Pro Bowl quarterback Deshaun Watson start every game through 33 touchdowns against only 7 interceptions and end with a passer rating of 112.4. 183. However, Mr. Watson was unavailable to play due to allegations of sexual misconduct, and Mr. Cully was forced to start Davis Mills, a rookie third round draft pick at quarterback. The team had also lost its top players in recent years, J.J. Watt and DeAndre Hopkins. First off, Mr. Watson was unavailable to play due to allegations of sexual misconduct. I mean, how? Come on. Why are you shielding this guy? Deshaun Watson was unavailable because he said that he wasn't going to play for the Houston Texans anymore. It wasn't just because of misconduct. Like you're trying to make David Culley into this victim, which again he was put into a shitty situation, and he probably should not have been fired because he managed to build a good culture down there in Houston. But like, don't make it out like, oh man, the quarterback he was counting on said no. Deshaun Watson said he wasn't going to play for them, regardless of David Culley. Like, David Culley came in and he still said no. Um, Immediately after the season ended, the Texans fired Mr. Culley without explanation other than vague philosophical differences, which begs the question why he was hired just 1 year earlier in the first place. 186. Even the Texans GM acknowledged that a change after one season is unusual. Section F. No opportunities provided to Chris Richard. Again, this is signaling to coaches, hey, you want to join this lawsuit? We're going after the NFL. 187. Chris Richard has been a collegiate and NFL coach for more than 10 years. 188. He boasts an impressive resume, including being instrumental in the formation of the Seattle Seahawks Legion of Boom as both a secondary coach and a defensive coordinator in the mid 2010s. 189. He was also very successful as a defensive assistant for the Dallas Cowboys and New Orleans Saints. 190. Mr. Richard had 5 head coach interviews during 2018 and 2019 hiring cycles and received no offers. 191. Meanwhile, 6 white head coaches were hired in 2018 and another 6 were hired in 2019. 192. Mr. Richard was reportedly not interviewed at all during the 2020 cycle, and it seems now that he is being considered only for a defensive coordinator positions. Section G. Terrell Austin never given a chance. 193. Terrell Austin has been a collegiate and NFL coach for more 30. Sometimes I feel like I'm struggling reading this, but no, there's plenty of typos here. Terrell also has been a collegiate NFL coach for more 30 years. After success with the Seahawks, Ravens, and Lions, Mr. Austin was interviewed for no fewer than 10 open head coach positions. He was rejected for each one. 195. Following the 2016 hiring cycle, Mr. Austin stated that only 2 of the 4 interviews he engaged in that year felt like legitimate interviews where he had a legitimate shot at the job. He was asked in a follow-up question whether his saying 2 of the job's interviews were legitimate meant that he believed that the other 2 were Rooney Rule interviews. Austin said, "Take it however you want." Section 2. Eric Bieniemy cannot get a head coach job. Paragraph 196. Eric Bieniemy has been a highly successful NFL coach for almost 12 years and has yet to be offered a head coach position despite more than 70 vacancies during that time. In paragraph 197, in high school, Mr. Bieniemy was a second-team All-American and went on to play at the University of Colorado. In 1990, his senior year, he was the nation's second leading rusher with 1,068 28 yards and 17 touchdowns, and he finished third in Heisman Award voting. 198. Mr. Bieniemy was drafted in the second round of the NFL draft and played in the league for 9 seasons until 1999. 199. After going back to college to complete his degree, Mr. Bieniemy then took jobs as the running back coach for Colorado for 2 years and at UCLA for 3 years. Paragraph 200. In 2005, following a 9-2 season, concluding with a win in the Sun Bowl. Mr. Bieniemy accepted a position as running back coach for the Minnesota Vikings. Paragraph 201. During his tenure, the team's lead back Adrian Peterson led the NFC in rushing in 2007 and 2008. 202 in 2010, Mr. Bieniemy was named the Vikings assistant head coach for the offense. Paragraph 203 in 2011, Mr. Bieniemy returned to Colorado as offensive coordinator, only to return to the NFL 2 years later as the running back coach for Kansas City Chiefs. 204 in 2018, Mr. Bieniemy was promoted to offensive coordinator. In Mr. Bieniemy's first season as offensive coordinator, the Chiefs were first in the NFL in yards per game and scored the third most points in the season in NFL history. Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes became only the second quarterback in NFL history, along with Peyton Manning, to throw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns in a season. 205 in 2018, the Chiefs advanced to the AFC Championship game where they lost to the Tom Brady-led New England Patriots. Paragraph 206 in 2019, Mr. Bieniemy won his first Super Bowl when the Chiefs. Period. In 2019, Mr. Bieniemy won his first Super Bowl when the Chiefs. Okay. In 2020 and 2021, Mr. Bieniemy helped lead the Chiefs to AFC Championship game, and in 2020 the Super Bowl. Paragraph 207, without question, Mr. Bieniemy has the pedigree, track record, and reputation to make him a sought-after head coach. However, despite being interviewed for approximately 20 vacant positions over the last 5 years, no team has extended Mr. Bieniemy an offer. Paragraph 208, during this time, numerous white candidates who are clearly less qualified have taken over the head coaching duties for numerous NFL teams. Part of the reason why Bieniemy hasn't gotten a job is because a lot of, they've made, the Chiefs have made the playoff runs for several years now in a row, and by the time that they're done, because they either lost in the championship game or the Super Bowl, every NFL club has already hired their head coach because they need to. They can't hire somebody who's still actively coaching in the playoffs. They can interview them, but not hire them. Not to say that he's not worthy. Like, Eric Bieniemy needs to be a coach somewhere. He's a great coach. Rule 23, class actions allegations. Number 1, class definition. This is a class action pursuant to Federal Rule Civil Procedure FRCP 23, brought by plaintiff on behalf of a proposed class of similarly situated employees. The proposed class, subject to a future revision as may be necessary, is defined as follows: all black head coach, offensive and defensive coordinator, and quarterback coaches, as well as general managers and black candidates for those positions during the applicable statute of limitations period. The unlawful conduct suffered by plaintiff and the members of the proposed class class includes, but it's not limited to, members of the proposed class have been discriminatorily denied positions as head coaches, offensive and defensive coordinators, and quarterback coaches, as well as general managers. Members of the proposed class have been discriminatorily subjected to sham illegitimate interviews. Members of the proposed class have been subjected to discriminatory retention practices and or termination decisions. Members of the proposed class have been subjected to disparate terms and conditions of employment, including but not limited to lack of opportunity and harm to professional reputation. And members of the proposed class have been subjected to unequal compensation relative to their white peers. Paragraph 211, upon information and belief, the proposed class contains more than 40 members during the applicable limitations period. Paragraph 212, plaintiff and proposed class have standing to seek such relief of the adverse effects that defendants' unlawful practices, and or policies have led on them individually and generally. The patterns practices and/or policies described in this complaint demonstrate that discrimination is not unusual at the NFL. Rather, it is part and parcel of the league's standard operating patterns, practices, and job policies. Section 2, numerosity and impracticability of joinder. Now, this is what the case that they need to make to ensure that this case is named as a class, as opposed to making each coach bring in their individual claims. Because the standard under Rule 23 is it is better for this action to be brought in as a class action and more efficient, as opposed to um, uh, each one bringing their own claims individually. But at the same time, they have to safeguard the fact that each individual plaintiff may have unique allegations. So they have to make some sort of point that no, everybody essentially has the same allegation, and it's just better for all of them to be heard at once in this class action, with Brian Flores as at least as this complaint purports to be the class representative for all putative class members. Paragraph 214. The members of the proposed class are sufficiently numerous to make joinder of their claims impracticable. Uh, Paragraph 215. The exact number of proposed class members is unknown because such information is in the exclusive control of defendants and requires discovery. Listen, buddy, like, you just named off a bunch of people and claim to have all these statistics. I mentioned earlier that I don't think you can get to 50. Not that 50 is the bright line rule under Federal Rule Civil Procedure 23, but it's usually the baseline that attorneys will take when bringing in these types of actions, because less than 50, you're probably unlikely getting a class certification, because keep in mind, just because this was brought as a class action complaint doesn't mean that it'll receive a class certification. That comes later down the point. Um, Paragraph 216. Upon information and belief, there are more than 40 current, former, and prospective members of the proposed class who have been subjected to the discriminatory conduct described herein. If you can only get to 40. Um, we're again, 40. That seems high. Uh, I could, I would need to do like 5 hour research to try to come up with 40 names. Um, 20 Paragraph 217. Although precise determination of the number of proposed class members is immeasurable at this time, it is significant and satisfied the numerosity requirement of FRCP 23. That's your opinion, but numerosity is not exactly defined by a specific number in Federal Rule Civil Procedure 23. Common questions of law and fact. The claims alleged on behalf of the plaintiff and prospect class raise questions of law and fact common to all plaintiff and proposed class members. Among these are: A, whether members of the proposed class have been denied positions as head coaches, offensive and defensive coordinators, and quarterback coaches, as well as general managers, and whether race and/or color played motivating factors in those decisions. B, whether members of the proposed class have been discriminatorily subjected to sham and illegitimate interviews due in whole or in part to their race and/or color. C, whether members of the proposed class have been subjected to discriminatory retention practices and/or termination decisions in whole or part due to race and/or color. D, whether members of the proposed class have been subjected to disparate terms and conditions of employment, including but not limited to lack of opportunity and harm to professional reputation due in whole or in part to race and color. E, whether members of the proposed class have been subjected to unequal compensation relative to their white peers, and whether this is due in whole or in part to race and or color. Whether the NFL is complicit and has participated in and or aided and abetted the NFL teams in the discriminatory treatment of the members of the proposed class. G, whether the NFL and or the NFL teams collectively engage in discriminatory practices towards the members of the proposed class. And H, whether the NFL and or the NFL teams engage in conduct that had a discriminatory impact on the members of the proposed class. Paragraph 219. Thus, the common questions requirement under FRCP 23A is satisfied. Section 4, typicality of claims and relief sought. Paragraph 220, plaintiff is a member of the proposed class and he seeks to represent. Paragraph 221, the claims of plaintiffs are typical of the claims of the proposed class in that they are uh, in that they all arise from the same unlawful patterns, practices, and/or policies of defendants, and are based on their legal theory that these patterns, practices, and/or policies violate legal rights. Paragraph 222. Plaintiff and the members of the proposed class all allege that they each are the victims of unlawful adverse employment decisions and or treatment based on race and or color. Paragraph 223. They're the player that the relief that plaintiff seeks as a result of defendant's unlawful patterns, practices, and/or policies is typical of the relief which is sought on behalf of the proposed class. Paragraph 224. Thus, the typicality requirement of FRCP 23A is satisfied. Section 5. Adequacy of representation. These interests of plaintiffs are coexistent with those of proposed class. He seeks to represent in the instant case. Paragraph 226. Plaintiff is willing and able to represent the proposed class fairly and vigorously as they pursue their similar individual claims. Paragraph 227. Plaintiff has retained counsel who are qualified and experienced in employment class action litigation and who are able to meet the time and fiscal demands necessary to litigate a class action of this size and complexity. Paragraph 228. The combined interest, experience, and resources of plaintiff and his counsel to competently litigate the individual and class claims at issue in the instant case satisfy the adequacy of representation requirement of FRCP 23A. Requirements of Rule Section 6. Requirements of Rule 23B1. Without class certification, the same evidence and issues would be subject to relitigation in a multiple of individual lawsuits with an attendant risk of inconsistent adjudications and conflicting obligations. Paragraph 230. Specifically, all evidence of defendants' patterns, practices, and policies and the issues of whether they are in violation of the law would be exchanged and litigated repeatedly. Paragraph 231. Accordingly, certification of the proposed class is the most efficient and judicious means of presenting the evidence and arguments necessary to resolve such questions for plaintiff, the proposed class, and defendants. Paragraphs 232. By filing this complaint, plaintiff is preserving the right of the proposed class members with respect to the statute of limitations on their claims. Therefore, not certifying a class would substantially impair and or impede the other members' ability to protect their interests. Section 7. Requirements of Rule 23B2. Defendants have acted on the grounds described herein generally applicable to plaintiff and the members of the proposed class by adopting and following systemic patterns, practices, and or policies that are discriminatory towards the proposed class. Paragraph 234. These discriminatory acts are fostered by defendants' standard patterns, practices, and or policies and are not sporadic or isolated and support the request for final injunctive and declaratory relief with respect to plaintiff and the proposed class as a whole. Paragraph 235. Declaratory and injunctive relief flow directly and automatically from proof of common questions of law and fact regarding the existence of systematic discrimination and race and or color committed against the proposed class. Paragraph 236. Declaratory and injunctive relief are factual and legal predicates for plaintiff and class members' entitlement to monetary and non-monetary remedies for individual losses caused by and exemplary purposes necessitated by such systemic discrimination. Paragraph 237. Accordingly, injunctive and declaratory systems, uh, declaratory relief are among the predominant forms of relief sought in this case. And Section 8, requirement of Rule 23b3. The common paragraph 238, the common issues of fact and law affecting plaintiffs' claims are, and those of the prospect class, including but not limited to the common issues identified in the paragraphs above, predominate over issues affecting only individual claims. Paragraph 239, a class action is superior to other available means for the fair and efficient adjudication of plaintiffs' claims and the claims of the proposed class. Paragraph 240, the cause of providing defendants' pattern and practices of discrimination makes it impracticable for the members of the proposed class to pursue their claims individually. In paragraph 241, the class action will not be difficult to manage for reasons including but not limited to discrete organizational nature of the proposed class, as well as the common questions of law and fact described above. All right. Before we get to the actual causes of action here, something to note is that everything from starting here, Rule 23 class action allegations, this is stating the case as to why the court should certify this lawsuit as a class action lawsuit. And the elements here are, the class definition, the numerosity, common questions of law and fact is the third element, and fourth, typicality of claims and relief sought, and adequacy of representation. And a lawsuit, class action lawsuit, can be certified under Federal Rule Civil Procedure 23B1, 23B2, and 23B3. And in here, they make the case as to why the court should be able to qualify it as a B1, B2, or B3 class action. Now, we're on in this 58-page document. It is at the end of page 52 that we actually get to the substance of the laws that plaintiff is bringing this case under. Like, all we have read so far are, the requirements for class certifications, a lot of background information, and the purported facts as stated by plaintiff. Now it's the case. This is the portion where plaintiff gets to state these are the laws that he is suing defendants under. And I try not to be a little too judgmental when I saw this part, but usually in a complaint, you'd want, at least in a complaint this of a case with these many facts, you'd want the cause of action sections to be not so short. In total, we're talking about 5.5 pages in which they actually go over the elements of each cause of action that they're bringing against defendants. Meanwhile, a lot of space for this lawsuit was used to make to highlight the background of the NFL, which may be necessary, and that's certainly a legal strategy. But when reading causes of action, I think they have four. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're fairly thin in how they try to meet the elements of each claim. And I should note too, like I said, first cause of action is under section 1981. Section let me see, which one is this one? I think this is the New York State Human Rights Law. The third is the New York City Human Rights Law, and the fourth claim is under the New Jersey law against discrimination and disability discrimination in employment, and it only applies to the Giants. Where's I mean, over this document, Brian Flores does go over several times where he says that he was defamed. Where's the defamation claim? There isn't one, and I think that speaks something. I don't know if it speaks volume, but it at least says something about the fact that they didn't bring a defamation claim if they are in fact claiming that he was wronged in some way. Um, who knows? Complaints get amended all the time. Um, it could, and even in this document, they state that it's going to be amended once they get a right to sue letter from the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Office. Um, so maybe they'll bring a defamation claim, but I just thought it caught my eye how he uses defamation or uses the word defame several times through this document, and there's no libel defamation claim against any of the teams, which I guess in this case it would be the Miami Dolphins. Um, First cause of action: discrimination under Section in 1981 on behalf of plaintiff and the proposed class as to all defendants. Paragraph 242, plaintiff on behalf of himself and proposed class members hereby repeat, reinstates, and reallege each and every previous allegation as fully set forth herein. Paragraph 243, as described above, defendants have discriminated against plaintiff and the proposed class on the basis of race and or color in violation of 1981 by discriminatorily denying proposed class members positions as head coaches, offensive and defensive coordinators, and quarterback coaches, as well as general managers, discriminatorily subjecting them to sham and illegitimate interviews, subjecting proposed class members to discriminatory retention practices and or termination decisions, and subjecting proposed class members to disparate terms and conditions of employment, including but not limited to lack of opportunity and harm to professional reputation, and subjecting proposed class members to unequal compensation relative to their white peers. Section 244, defendants have fostered, condoned, accepted, and ratified and or otherwise failed to prevent or remedy discriminatory conduct due to race and or color. Each defendant has actually participated in and aided and abated the discriminatory conduct of other defendants. As 245, as a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct in violation of Section 1981, plaintiff and the proposed class have suffered and continue to suffer economic damage, loss of opportunity, loss of reputation, and mental anguish for which they are entitled to an award of damages. 246, defendants' unlawful discriminatory actions constitute reckless, malicious, willful, and wanton violations of Section 1981, for which plaintiff and the proposed class are entitled to an award of punitive damages. Second cause of action, discriminatory under NYSHRL, which I think is the New York State Human Rights Law. Plaintiff on they take all paragraphs and incorporate them herein as described above. Defendants have discriminated against plaintiff and the proposed class on the basis of race and or color in violation of NYSHLR by discriminatorily denying proposed class members positions as head coaches, offensive, and they basically repeat the same thing that they did for 1881. Let's see. Yeah, it even ends the same way. So they're essentially saying they essentially for 1981 they're repeating the same allegations for the violations of the New York human rights law. And again, they repeat the same thing for the New York City law, and they repeat it again for the New Jersey law. this feels pretty bare in my opinion. Counts 4 1 through 4, like they just read the legal conclusion, like they don't go one by one, especially for like at least Brian Flores himself, and saying this was how Brian Flores was met element one. This is how Brian Flores meant element two. This is how Brian Flores meant element three. This is how Brian Flores meant element four, so on and so forth, and element five. Prayer for relief. This is usually the section that you have to include in every complaint as a plaintiff to ask the court what you want. Wherefore, plaintiff prays that the court enters judgment in his favor and against defendants for the following relief: A, a declaratory judgment that the actions, conduct, and practices of the defendants complained of herein violate laws of the United States and the state and city of New York and the state of New Jersey. B, an award of injunctive relief necessary to cure defendants' discriminatory policies and practices. And the complaint did go over um, several things that plaintiff would want as injunctive relief to avoid future discrimination. C, certification of this action as class action pursuant to Rule 23 of Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. D, an award of damages to plaintiff and the proposed class and against the defendants in an amount to be determined at trial to compensate them for all monetary and economic damages. E, an award of damages to plaintiff and the proposed class and against the defendants in an amount to be determined at trial to compensate them for all non-monetary and or compensatory damages, including but not limited to loss of reputation, loss of opportunity, and mental anguish. F, an opportunity of punitive damages to plaintiff and the proposed class and against defendants in an amount to be determined at trial. G, pre and post judgment interest on all amounts due. H, an award of plaintiff and proposed classes reasonable attorneys' fees and costs. And I, such other further relief as the court deem just and proper. Signed by Douglas H. Whitger. Oh boy. And John Elefthakis. I sorry I butchered your name, buddy. A lot going on here. Giving you my opinion as to whether or not this is a if enough has been alleged here. Like again, Brian Flores doesn't need to prove his entire case at the pleading stage. That's what discovery is for. And if it gets to discovery, oh boy, that's the thing. I think that they've left this pretty open to potentially an attack on motion for dismissal, um, because it is pretty vague in areas. But if it gets to discovery, oh, you don't want to be you don't want attorneys taking depositions of people like Stephen Ross, John Mara, and make those public. Like I think this probably ends in settlement. Just like the Colin Kaepernick lawsuit ended up in a settlement. But I wonder because this the NFL responded to this pretty harshly, and in an hour and 30 minutes after this was filed and made public, and the NFL said this lawsuit is without merit. So they came out pretty strong. Now that can be because the NFL is just putting up a position. They're holding strong, and it's just a negotiating tool to try to come to a settlement that will be less than what plaintiff would even want, or they might fight this. They'll say, "Listen, you've said a lot of things about the past, but that's the thing. The past is the past, and right now, We've improved. We're happy with the measures that we're taking and where we're going. And you, Brian Flores, we're not discriminated against. You are an asshole. um, and it's if at the end of the day it comes out that Brian Flores was in fact discriminated against, and that's a possibility. Like, I'll feel bad for saying this. Um, but man, I don't feel like this was a very smart decision. From Brian Flores himself, because he's still a pretty young man in the coaching world, and his only experience prior to being the head coach of the Miami Dolphins was to work under the Patriots, and he might be killing his career by doing this so quickly. And he potentially had a prosperous career ahead of him, and maybe he's doing it for the greater good. I'm a little cynical about people doing things for the greater good when they file a lawsuit for money. I mean, come on. Um, Surely, if the NFL offered to do all the injunctive relief that he wants, but give him $0, I'm sure Brian Flores wouldn't like that. He wants to get paid. But it's I part of me thinks that he might have jumped the gun on doing this because he only has like the one the one job outside of New England to have been, you know, making these broad allegations of the NFL at large. But at the same time, racism in the NFL is well documented. It's well known. Um, Going back to as far as Colin Kaepernick and going back to the inception of the league, where there was a ban on black players for a long time, and the Washington Redskins owners' own comments and refusal to integrate. We'll see where this goes. I suspect that this was fascinating, and I just wanted to go over it because you know what was fascinating to me wasn't exactly just like the allegations in it. It's that this comes out and overshadows Tom Brady's retirement. Uh, and it even implicates Tom Brady himself if, in fact, the reports about him being the quote unquote prominent quarterback was, in fact, Tom Brady. Oh, could you have imagined him going to the Dolphins? That would have been something. Anyway, this has been Bryce Vega, and I am signing out. Thank you for tuning in.